Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Was Chibiusa's Brother from Sailor Moon Part 2. Before we start, please go support marioiale for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistake in character's gender, but of course Naruto is a male. Chapter 13, Lunar Exorcism, 101. Beginning of the story. Tsukino Usagi's house. Naruto leaned against the wall next to Usagi's bedroom door as he read the rather large book that described all the different temples found throughout the world. While he did so, Usagi was sitting on the floor with her back against the bed with a book in her arms. Chibiusa was lying on the bed looking over her shoulder in a tired manner, and Luna was on the other side with her eyes closed. After his long and tiring journey, the prince found her. But the princess had fallen into an eternal sleep, under the spell of an evil witch. He knelt and kissed her. Boring, Chibiusa said, interrupting Usagi. Usagi blinked and turned her head to look at the younger rabbit as she said, "You've got to be kidding me. This is the best part of the story, but I already know this story," Chibiusa complained. "You mean I just read this for my own enjoyment?" Usagi asked before looking over the book at Naruto and saying, "Naruto, you're quite the multitasker. You've been listening, haven't you?" Naruto looked up from his book and said, "I beg the first rule of being a kid." Usagi felt her eyebrow rise as she said, "And what could that rule be, young man?" Smiling, Naruto said, "As a child, you won't enjoy anything that even suggests romance or always being called sissy boy." Usagi blinked before muttering under her breath, "That sounds good." This caused Naruto's smile to turn into a full-blown grin before he returned to his own reading. Shaking his head, Usagi said, "Fine, I guess I'll just enjoy the best part of this wonderful story alone. Go ahead and do it, cousin," Naruto said, making Usagi frown at him before she started reading the last few pages, continuing to talk out loud as if proving her point, making Naruto raise his own eyebrow before ignoring him. When he finished, he gently closed the book with a soft click and got up to put the book away, only to stop at the sight of Chibiusa with her eyes closed in bed. Frowning, he said, "I can't believe she fell asleep during the best part." Her head turned as she heard Naruto's much heavier book close with a thud as he stood up with a sigh and said, "From what Mom and Dad have told me, my sister has never been a night owl." Placing the book in his ever-present backpack and swinging it over his shoulders, Naruto tightened the straps as he walked and lifted his sister into his arms as he said, "I should probably head to bed too. After all, I did have that training session with Mr. Hino." Usagi winced as that sentence accidentally brought back memories of what happened when said priest tried to start a martial arts class that was interrupted by the Black Moon clan. Seeing the flinch but misinterpreting it, Naruto smiled and said, "Don't worry, cousin. I'm sure he'll go easy on me." "That's not what I was thinking," Usagi said. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but Usagi waved him off and said, "Go to bed, my little maelstrom." Naruto stiffened at his words as Usagi blinked and muttered, "Why did I just say that?" With a neutral face, Naruto shrugged and said, "Probably because I'm small and we're family, even if we're from two very different centuries. Maybe," Usagi admitted before yawning and saying, "I think I'll hit the hay too." "Good night, Naruto." "Good night, Usagi," Naruto said before leaving and turning left to go up the attic stairs. As he walked up the stairs, he looked at his sister as she yawned and said, "That was weird." Smiling at her, he said, "It's not as weird as you call Envy, who once woke you up with your hair down." Chibiusa blushed and turned her head to the side, causing Naruto to chuckle before reaching the top of the stairs and placing Chibiusa on top of her bed. As her sister dug under her blankets, she said, "Good night, brother." Smiling as she hid, she said, "Good night, sister." Scene change. Hikawa Shrine. Naruto ducked as Rei's grandfather sent a haymaker over his head. He then leaned back into a right hand as the old man attempted to sweep his feet. Spinning on his hand, Naruto swung his left foot toward his opponent's head only to have it deflected and quickly flip from the counterpunch straight to his ribs. Mr. Hino frowned as he took a step forward while turning on his heels to send a kick at Naruto's guard. When the blonde raised his arm in a sweeping motion to throw him off balance, he said, "You seem to be a bit distracted this morning, young prince." "Yeah, well, something weird happened last night, and it keeps popping up in my mind," Naruto said, spinning away from the old man who had spun his maneuver against him using his own hand to counter the loss of balance, and sent his other foot towards him. It had been strange for Naruto when the old man had cornered him 2 months ago, and told him he knew exactly when Naruto was, thanks to a vision of the great shrine fire, and the man wanted details on why he and his sister were out there at this time. Rei would be quite shocked if she ever found out that her grandfather had known almost from the start what kind of trouble he usually got into. Apparently there was very little he could hide from a fire-reading master when it came to anything even remotely about his family. Who knows? Oh! What happened? The man asked as he spun around while sending a strong straight punch that would shatter Naruto's guard if he tried to block it. But to his slight surprise, the blonde didn't deflect the blow. Instead, he leaned forward slightly before catching the punch in his right hand and used his strength to spin in a circle and slam his right elbow into Naruto's right forearm with a force that caused the old man to slide off the floor by about a foot. Shifting into a defensive stance, Naruto shrugged and said, "When it was time to go to bed last night, she called me her little maelstrom. It had caught me a little off guard since that was what Mom called me before I left for the house." "Leave the village," Mr. Hino hummed in thought as he tilted his head slightly before laughing and saying, "Well, the bond between a mother and her child is very strong. Even when one isn't aware of the other, it can't help but form between them when they meet. And Usagi is already aware that you are her offspring, even if she doesn't know how close the two of you are. Is it really a surprise that she claimed you like that?" "Well, no, but hearing her call me that when she doesn't actually know I'm her son is just weird," Naruto said. "I guess it would be. Either way, I think we've done enough for the day. Come, let's check on your sister," Mr. Hino said as he dropped his own stance, causing Naruto to do the same, and the blonde followed him out of his training area, grabbing his backpack that was by the door. As he did so, the two walked through the shrine in comfortable silence as they made their way to the building that housed the shrine's prediction fire. Upon reaching the building, they took off their shoes and placed them to the side of the door against two other pairs of shoes before entering the building. Entering the fire hall, they saw Rei kneeling in front of the fire with Chibiusa by her side. Both girls were wearing the shrine uniform, and Chibiusa's hair was down but tied with a ribbon like Rei's kept it from accidentally burning. Chibiusa was staring into the fire with her face beginning to scrunch up. But as she began to squint, Rei said, "Don't try so hard, Chibiusa. He won't come to you if you try to force him too hard, but every time I think I see something, it disappears." The younger mole complained. "That's not surprising considering you've only started learning 2 weeks ago," Mr. Hino said, announcing his and Naruto's presence as the two approached and knelt beside the two girls. "And even then, you've only had 6 lessons, 3 of which were learning how to unlock your ability to see even the shapes hidden in a fire. It takes time before you can even begin to see anything with real clarity. Reading fire is like a muscle, you have to exercise it for it to grow stronger. But just like a muscle, you can tear it if you overexert it. It's a fairly common mistake beginners make, and it tends to set them back a bit when they do. You have to be patient." All of this went over Naruto's head as he listened, as he apparently didn't have the correct inner eye to read fire like the Hinos and his sister did. Oh, he understood the muscle metaphor well enough, but how could he force something that wasn't physically there? Though Mr. Hino thought he might. Dream of seeking general things in the future, note the emphasis on power. Shaking his head, he thought. And Kushina-sensei wonders why I always lose my gaze whenever she talks to me about reading those tarot cards of hers. Mr. Hino brought him out of that thought by clapping his hands as the man said, "Well, I think that's enough philosophy for one day. Come, it's time for lunch." Easily getting up from his kneeling position without using his hands, the man bowed to the fire before turning and leaving the room. Naruto pulled back a little to stand up and did the same before following after his semi-teacher/sparring partner as Rei and Chibiusa chose the sensible route and used their hands to push themselves up and follow as well after giving their own bows. They quickly made their way to the building that housed the kitchen and dining area and saw Chad cutting the last of the sandwiches he'd prepared for everyone. Placing them on the table and taking a seat, he asked, "So, how's Chibiusa doing?" He also couldn't shoot the reading, though he was fairly accurate when it came to what was known as Atmo reading, which was reading the air currents and other atmospheric variables around him. It wasn't really what one would call an inner eye skill, but thanks to him, the Hinos were never caught flat-footed when it started raining due to natural causes. He actually taught a small class how to do it properly as part of their rent payment. "Very well, actually. He's already starting to see the pictures a bit," Rei said as she took a half-eaten sandwich and chewed it thoughtfully while studying her student. Swallowing, she said, "I'd give him a month before he can start seeing general pictures. However, It will be a while before he can focus enough to see things on command, and even longer before he can predict anything with any kind of guaranteed accuracy. Even better than anything I could ever hope to achieve," Naruto said before taking a mega bite of his sandwich and chewing before swallowing as he said, "Every time I see him, all I see is a starving teenager devouring his wooden lunch," Chad chuckled as he said. "Yeah, well, I think we've all confirmed that you're better at reading the here and now than you were yesterday or tomorrow." "Very true," Mr. Hino said as he took a second sandwich and pulled a pickle from the jar in front of him before biting into it. Chewing thoughtfully as he considered his semi-student, he swallowed and said, "I don't think Naruto's eye will open for another decade at least. However, it won't be very strong, and unfortunately, even when it does open, it's going to be more dream-oriented than anything, and those are the hardest to try to pinpoint accurately. It would be best if he used his analytical skills to read what's around him instead of getting ahead of himself." "None taken. I'm not really one for this forward-looking kind of thing anyway." "True," Chad said as he grabbed a pickle for himself and popped it in his mouth. Chewing twice before swallowing, he said, "However, that being said, you seem to be pretty good at reading the 2 times you've been in my class." Naruto shrugged and said, "We're taught to be as observant as possible at my school. At most, reading really draws on that awareness." Chad nodded and the topic changed to what the two boys were learning in school, starting an argument between Naruto and Ray about how it wasn't fair that they couldn't do better science experiments than just making little magnets and other small things. Scene change. Tsukino Homes, 11:37 p.m. Naruto's eyes shot open when he heard a staircase creak beneath him. Immediately shooting up, his eyes shot up before relaxing slightly as he saw that there was no one in the room with him and his sister. Moving towards the staircase, he looked down and sent chakra into his ears. Picking up the sound of someone moving around downstairs, he frowned before turning his head as he heard his sister get out of bed. Silently walking over, he gently pushed her down and said, "I'll take care of this. Are you staying here?" He waited until Chibiusa nodded before reaching for his backpack and pulling out his sword. Now armed, he quickly headed toward the second floor where he saw Luna coming out of Usagi's room. The lunar cat must have sensed him because she immediately turned her head. She was about to gasp at the sight, but he allowed his crescent moon mark to appear for 5 seconds and immediately relaxed when she saw her. A noise below them caught their attention, and they exchanged glances before heading down to ground level. Seeing a light coming from the kitchen, the two headed over and pressed themselves against the wall next to the door. Leaning his head against the doorframe and slowly tilting his head to do a quick scan of the room, Naruto allowed his tense body to relax at the sight of the blonde hair tied up in 2 buns and let out a sigh as he said, "Isn't it a little late for a snack, Usagi?" He frowned when she didn't respond, and his frown grew when he heard a nearly silent sob escape his expectant mother. Exchanging a glance with Luna, the two entered the kitchen and walked over to the teenager kneeling in front of the open refrigerator. Luna gasped at the considerably less full appliance and said, "Usagi, what are you doing? You'll have a terrible time sleeping if you eat all of that." Usagi's sobs grew louder as she said, "I don't care. I'm going to eat all my problems. Mamoru doesn't love me anymore, he's even got a new girlfriend." Usagi was near every fight now. "What?" Naruto asked in a high-pitched whisper, and Luna flinched as killing intent slowly filled the air. Naruto frowned and said, "Alright, that does it. I'll just talk to that asshole for a bit tomorrow." Frowning in a frown as he watched his mother still eating, he said, "But that can wait." Grabbing the bun Usagi had just taken out of the refrigerator, he tossed it back into her bowl before closing the refrigerator door and grabbed Usagi's hands as she reached to open the refrigerator door again. Placing himself between her and the door, he let go of her left hand and lightly slapped her left cheek, leaving a pink mark that made her blink and raise her now free hand to her now sore cheek. However, at least she had stopped crying. Naruto let go of her right hand as he said, "Now you listen to me, Usagi Tsukino. You are going to stop this absolutely ridiculous behavior. You're a Sailor Scout, and Sailor Scouts don't just turn to food as a form of suicide like a soap opera diva who finally had reality slapped her. You're stronger than that. Now go back to your room, change, and meet me at the front door in 10 minutes. If you're not there when I come down, then I will kick your door down and drag you out. Do you understand me?" Usagi could only nod to her future son and slowly stood up and left the kitchen. Naruto sighed before following her to change as well. Upon reaching the attic, he sighed again when he saw his sister looking at him in confusion. Heading to the closet to change his clothes, he said, Usagi needs some fresh air, so we're going to be going. I'll leave a clone since we'll probably be gone for a while. Try to go back to sleep while we're gone, okay? Okay. Chibiusa said, still unsure of what was happening, but she trusted her brother was handling it, and turned around to face the wall trying to do as he said. 10 minutes later, Naruto watched Usagi close the door before turning around to face him. Her eyes were still red from crying so hard, and the sight made Naruto frown before he turned around and said, Let's go. He then ran off, and Usagi and Luna quickly followed. As they ran, Naruto looked back and said, I think it's time for another lesson on moon abilities, Usagi. This is how you use your moon energy when you're not transformed to give yourself a sort of boost, making you faster and stronger to a certain degree. You already do this on a subconscious level when you transform into Sailor Moon, but if you can learn to do it by will, you can use it anytime you need to. Now, here's what you have to do. Change of scene. Park. The two Lunars stopped running when they reached the lake where people could rent small boats. Usagi bent down on her knees, panting a little as she said, I can't believe we can run that fast. Luna nodded from where she was sitting on Naruto's shoulder. The poor feline's fur was ruffled by the small wind the two generated as they ran. Naruto, who to Usagi's anger was even a little out of breath, smiled as he said, We can actually go a lot faster, but that's teleportation, not running, and I can't do it yet since it takes a lot to activate, never mind the extra energy cost to get where you want to teleport. If I tried, I'd probably end up in a coma for a few years, so you're not all-powerful. That's good to know, Usagi said with a tired smile, and Naruto laughed softly before stiffening at the sound. Well, it seems that old Wiseman's little vision was correct. The little brat and a heartbroken explorer. This should be fun. Naruto cursed himself, wondering how those two had managed to sneak up on him considering how familiar he was with their signatures now. He had a moon blade in his hand as he turned around and stood in front of Usagi and said, Sparky and Kinky, what a surprise. Let me guess, you two were feeling a little rusty and happened to have a nice little spar with me. Both Prisma and Avery growled at the nicknames, but those growls quickly turned into cruel smiles when Avery said, Things will be much different this time. Your partner behind you isn't in her sailor form, and we outnumber them 2-1. I think you mean I outnumber you by 3 or 2. Naruto said before a shadow clone appeared on either side of him. Both clones gave a feral grin as they pulled their swords from their backpacks, causing the sisters to take a step back and their faces to gain a wary look as they looked at the blades they were all too familiar with. Then the two seemed to remember something as they both started smiling when Avery said, I think you're probably too preoccupied to deal with us. Droid Hypnotica, now! The lake behind them erupted as a blue-haired droid with a horn on its forehead burst out of the water and launched itself at Usagi. The three blonde shinobi-trained men had sensed it just before it surfaced, and the original was already spinning when it shot out of the water. The instant the droid began moving towards Usagi, a lunar wave shot past the older mole on an intercepting path. However, as soon as it reached the droid, it seemed to turn into black smoke and seemingly passed right through it. Naruto's surprise at this was enough to cause the droid to move closer, and suddenly black smoke was entering Usagi's mouth and going down her windpipe. The effects of this strange possession were immediately apparent as Usagi's eyes rolled back into the back of her head, and she fell to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Then her body began to glow pink, and a mist of energy began to leave her. Usagi! Naruto and Luna cried out in alarm as he leaped the 5 feet between them and landed in a crouch beside her, placing his hand on her forehead and using the diagnostic jutsu to determine what was happening to their expectant mother. Their clones turned their heads slightly to see what was happening out of the corner of their eyes, but both kept their other eye on their opponents. Meanwhile, Luna watched worriedly, unable to do anything as her charge was attacked from within. Avery laughed at the sight and said, Oh no, I don't think the little girl will ever wake up again, how sad. Her sister started laughing as well before they both immediately stopped as Naruto's killing intent began to suffocate them. Oh shit, they both thought with wide eyes as they remembered what this kid had done to Rubius after he had attacked the same girl not 2 weeks prior. Suddenly, neither of them thought their plan was any good anymore. Naruto looked up from Usagi's body and turned his head to look at them over his shoulder, and they both shuddered at the sight of her sapphire eyes bleeding silver, as she said in a double-toned voice, I want them in pieces. Their clones didn't need to say it twice and wasted no time launching themselves at the sisters, their swords screaming with wind chakra. Avery and Prisma jumped back to avoid the blades, but to their surprise, when they landed, they felt pain coming from their stomach areas. Looking down, they saw that they hadn't actually avoided the blades as they had thought, and that both had shallow but fairly long cuts on their stomachs. Looking up, they saw that the clone on the right had switched to a backhand grip with the blade held in front of his face. He began to complain louder, and a green energy became visible that not only covered the blade but also extended a full foot from the point. Grinning, the clone applied more wind chakra and shot out an additional 2.5 feet in length, making a total of 4.5 feet before the clone shot towards Prisma, weaving a web of green light around him and shattering the ground on either side of him as he ran. Prisma cursed and fired a bolt of lightning at the clone as he leaped. Her eyes widened as the clone expertly blocked the beam with his sword, and the beam instantly burned into nothing. However, she didn't have time to ask what happened because as soon as she landed, Prisma barely rolled out of the way of turning into half of what she was in time. Unfortunately, her left arm didn't escape unscathed. The claymore had left a rather nasty cut right on her elbow, and her forearm was now useless. Prisma bit back a scream as she tried to retaliate while the blonde's back was exposed due to the swing, but she was unable to do anything as the clone used the momentum of the swing to spin in a full circle and bring the sword down on her head. The wind surrounding the sword erupted and shot towards her opponent, which caught up with her and slashed at her body, causing her to scream in pure agony. Avery was having her own problems. When she looked at the clone standing in front of her sister, she was surprised to see the green energy covering the blade. But as the clone resumed its attack on the lightning user, a crackling sound drew her attention to the other clone, and her eyes widened as she saw the clone's blade surrounded by crackling electricity that moved in what seemed to be a chaotic yet controlled manner. The clone smiled at his opponent as he said, "I'm going to enjoy this." The clone then performed a flourish salute with his sword, ending by pointing it down at the ground right next to his right foot before shooting at his target fast enough to blur. Avery's eyes barely opened before he screamed as the clone's blade sliced through his torso, the lightning nature chakra in the blade lighting it up like the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center. The clone kept the blade in his torso for a full minute before it severed the chakra flow and pulled him out. Without the clone holding him up, Avery's now unconscious body wasted no time in falling to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. The clone looked down at the body for a moment and contemplated the fact that this would technically be his creator's first kill before twisting the sword around in his hand in a reverse grip and raising it in preparation to finish her off. This is war. And in war, people die, the clone thought. But just before he began to bring the sword down, the woman's body was covered in a black light and she disappeared. Sighing, the clone lowered the sword while thinking, "Looks like someone's been watching." Turning around, he saw the same thing happening to his brother's opponent, and the two exchanged glances before they turned back to their creator. With the original Naruto, a small part of Naruto noticed when his clones started attacking the two sisters, but almost all of his attention was focused on his soon-to-be mother and figuring out how to get the parasitic droid out of her. As he ran the diagnostic jutsu trying to figure out what was happening to the oldest mole and how best to stop it, he thought, of all the times, the lunar skate could come in handy, and I don't even know who it's asking for. As soon as he finished that thought, Naruto wanted to slap himself. Of course, I'm so stupid. The record. Naruto waited another 30 seconds for the diagnostic jutsu to finish before his crescent mark ignited and his consciousness temporarily fled to the plane of existence where time had no meaning. Scene change. Lunarscape. Registry. Naruto's eyes opened and he looked around the room he'd appeared in, as this was the first time he'd actually needed to use it. The registry was a 6-walled room that was about 6 meters long. Right in the center of the room, to the side of the door, was a pedestal with buttons for user interaction and a hologram projector mounted on the ceiling. Walking up to the pedestal, Naruto studied the buttons before looking up as the hologram projector automatically turned on, and a holographic image of a raven-colored man in a white coat appeared in front of him. Giving the appearance of a researcher, he smiled at Naruto as he said, "Greetings, I'm LRAIA, Lunar Registry Artificial Intelligence Assistant, but most people like to call me Lion. I'm here to help you locate whoever you need to contact. How may I be of assistance?" Naruto took a deep breath before saying, "I'm looking for someone who specializes in removing this type of possession." Placing his hand on an area outlined in the shape of a handprint, he allowed the pedestal to scan his memories and retrieve the results of the diagnostic jutsu he had just performed. As the holographic image emerged, Leon pulled a pair of glasses from his right coat pocket and opened them with his left hand as he put them on. Studying the readings in front of him, he nodded and said, "I think I know exactly the mole for your problem. Give me a moment to verify." Leon's hologram flickered for a few seconds, indicating he was executing a task, before becoming solid again as he said, "The mole I had in mind might be able to help you relatively late in life." Leon stepped aside, and another man appeared, this one red-headed with a trace of blue mixed in that marked him as the descendant of a celestial Mercury, wearing a doctor's outfit that resembled Leon's. The man's biostats appeared between the man and Leon, and the AI said, "This is Dr. Roderick Tryan. He was the leading researcher in the field of exorcism through yin-yang infusion of a possessed body. This is the man who practically invented this infusion method, so if anyone can help you, it would be him. Should I input the proper time coordinates into the Solaris chamber, sir?" Naruto quickly studied the man's bio for a moment before nodding and saying, "Yes, please, Leon. And thanks for the help." Leon smiled as he said, "You're welcome, Your Highness. The Solaris chamber will be ready once I reach it. Good luck, Naruto." Naruto nodded in thanks and walked away from the podium. Leon's hologram disappeared, and the door to the room opened. As he walked through, Naruto thought, "Thank goodness for AIs. I don't think I could have found the right person in one day without Leon's help." Arriving at Solaris's chamber, Naruto entered and walked down the inner corridor until he reached the end where an interface chair stood. Sitting in it, a holographic image displayed his coordinates and asked him if it was time to send his consciousness. Trusting Leon's knowledge, Naruto accepted the coordinates and watched as the screen disappeared and the gyroscope rings began to spin. Her surroundings began to fade before they suddenly came back into focus, and she found herself standing in the courtyard. Looking around in slight confusion, as this was her first time using the camera, she was slightly surprised to hear, "Well, now's a surprise. Usually, those who want to learn my trade are a little older before they give me a call." Turning around, Naruto came face to face with the good doctor and bowed as he said, "I recognize my circumstances are a little different, sir." Dr. Tryan's eyebrow rose and he said, "Oh." Scene change, Tokyo Park, the present. Naruto's eyes widened and he smiled as he thought, "Thanks, Solaris." With a serious face, he thought, "And thank you, Dr. Tryan. Now let's get this parasite out of Mom." Taking a deep breath, Naruto rubbed his hands together before placing his right hand on Usagi's forehead and his left hand over her heart. Taking another deep breath, Naruto's mark ignited and his lunar energy surged as he prepared it for the infusion. A moment later, he pushed it down and willed it to spread throughout Usagi's body. He immediately felt the parasite droid jerk in surprise at the added yang energy, which almost immediately began to disrupt the yin-yang android's balance within Usagi's body. As the droid tried to restore the balance relationship, Naruto thought, "Oh no, you're done pushing Usagi's energy anymore." He pushed his yang energy further and smirked as he heard the yin-based droid scream in pain as the tables turned and the yang energy began to destroy the enemy from within. 15 seconds later, the droid couldn't hold on any longer and Naruto watched it shoot out of Usagi's mouth screaming in pain. Lunar Exorcism, 101. Beginning of the story. Tsukino Usagi's house. Naruto leaned against the wall next to Usagi's bedroom door as he read the rather large book that described all the different temples found throughout the world. While he did so, Usagi was sitting on the floor with her back against the bed with a book in her arms. Chibiusa was lying on the bed looking over her shoulder in a tired manner, and Luna was on the other side with her eyes closed. After his long and tiring journey, the prince found her. But the princess had fallen into an eternal sleep, under the spell of an evil witch. He knelt and kissed her. "Boring," Chibiusa said, interrupting Usagi. Usagi blinked and turned her head to look at the younger rabbit as she said, "You've got to be kidding me. This is the best part of the story, but I already know this story." Chibiusa complained. "You mean I just read this for my own enjoyment?" Usagi asked before looking over the book at Naruto and saying, "Naruto, you're quite the multitasker. You've been listening, haven't you?" Naruto looked up from his book and said, "I beg the first rule of being a kid." Usagi felt her eyebrow rise as she said, "And what could that rule be, young man?" Smiling, Naruto said, "As a child, You won't enjoy anything that even suggests romance or always being called sissy boy. Usagi blinked before muttering under her breath. That sounds good. This caused Naruto's smile to turn into a full-blown grin before he returned to his own reading. Shaking his head, Usagi said, Fine, I guess I'll just enjoy the best part of this wonderful story alone. Go ahead and do it, cousin. Naruto said, making Usagi frown at him before she started reading the last few pages, continuing to talk out loud as if proving her point, making Naruto raise his own eyebrow before ignoring him. When he finished, he gently closed the book with a soft click and got up to put the book away, only to stop at the sight of Chibiusa with her eyes closed in bed. Frowning, he said, I can't believe she fell asleep during the best part. Her head turned as she heard Naruto's much heavier book close with a thud as he stood up with a sigh and said, From what Mom and Dad have told me, my sister has never been a night owl. Placing the book in his ever-present backpack and swinging it over his shoulders, Naruto tightened the straps as he walked and lifted his sister into his arms as he said, I should probably head to bed too. After all, I did have that training session with Mr. Hino. Usagi winced as that sentence accidentally brought back memories of what happened when said priest tried to start a martial arts class that was interrupted by the Black Moon clan. Seeing the flinch but misinterpreting it, Naruto smiled and said, Don't worry, cousin. I'm sure he'll go easy on me. That's not what I was thinking, Usagi said. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but Usagi waved him off and said, Go to bed, my little maelstrom. Naruto stiffened at his words as Usagi blinked and muttered, Why did I just say that? With a neutral face, Naruto shrugged and said, Probably because I'm small and we're family, even if we're from two very different centuries. Maybe, Usagi admitted before yawning and saying, I think I'll hit the hay too. Good night, Naruto. Good night, Usagi, Naruto said before leaving and turning left to go up the attic stairs. As he walked up the stairs, he looked at his sister as she yawned and said, That was weird. Smiling at her, he said, It's not as weird as you call NV who once woke you up with your hair down. Chibiusa blushed and turned her head to the side, causing Naruto to chuckle before reaching the top of the stairs and placing Chibiusa on top of her bed. Chapter 14. The First Convert. Story start. Enemy base. Rubius! We need that boy now! We've lost more ground going forward. Rubius blinked and turned his head to find a hologram of Wiseman already speaking. Turning fully, he listened as the cloaked figure continued. We can't afford any more delays in our mission. Well, can you help us? Rubius asked with a small hint of frustration present in his voice. I can tell you that the crystal's energy will be emitted from Hikawa Shrine sometime this afternoon. I want those children and the crystal. Rubius rested his chin on his left fist as he mused. Katsi is familiar with that temple, so I'll send her. Just make sure she knows what she's doing, Rubius. You've failed too many times already. No one is irreplaceable, you know. Wiseman grunted. And I hope Katsi is trustworthy. I see dark clouds around her. She would never betray us, Wiseman. I have her wrapped around my finger, Rubius said, defending his subordinate. For your sake, I hope you're right, Wiseman said before his hologram disappeared and Rubius turned to the mirror showing Tokyo and looked at the city. Time skip, 1 hour later. I'd better get there soon or I'll be too frustrated to play nice, Rubius thought with a frown as she stood to the side of her ship's entrance. As if that thought was what she'd been waiting for, Katsi suddenly walked through the portal, grumbling about lipstick being damaged by idiots who didn't see where they were going and other useless things. Rubius barely managed to keep his frown from fading as he said, It's about time you came back here. Katsi jumped a little as she turned around and said, Rubius! You surprised me. I've been waiting quite a while, Rubius said as he began walking toward her. Do you have one? Did we have a meeting? Katsi asked before Rubius caught up to her and placed his hands on her shoulders, causing her eyes to reflexively close and her cheeks to flush. No, Katsi, we didn't. I was just looking forward to seeing you. I miss you, Rubius said. Katsi's eyes widened as she said, Really? Of course, you're my best warrior. When you're gone, I'll worry. Now I have a special mission for you, Rubius said, a small smile appearing on his face. Oh, what is it? Have you located another crystal point to capture? Katsi asked, tilting her head slightly to the side. No, you have to go back to that temple, Rubius said. Katsi growled as she said, What? Are you kidding? Rubius closed his eyes and smiled as he said, No, Katsi, our targets will be there today. Katsi's mood was complete at 80 when she said, Oh really? That's fantastic. I can finally get that mushroom and that moon brat and capture the crystal for us too. Just you wait, we'll be back in the future at the end of the day. Rubius allowed a small frown to form on his face as he said, Better, I'm afraid Wiseman is losing his patience. Don't worry, I'll do it for us. Katsi said before tilting her head to the side and saying, I almost forgot. I have something for you, Rubius. The girl reached into her shopping bag and came out with a small glass bottle which she placed in Rubius's hand as she said, It's a special cologne that reminded me of your strength. Rubius frowned and said, I don't need it. He then proceeded to crush the bottle in his hand, causing the expensive cologne to drip from his hands onto the floor. Katsi gasped as she watched Rubius turn and start walking away. Calling over her shoulder, he said, That's what will happen to our lives if you fail. Don't let me down. As the man walked through one of the mirror portals, Katsi could only stare at his back with wide eyes. Scene change. Tsukino household 3 o'clock. Naruto smiled as he crawled along the ceiling of his future grandparents' first-floor stairwell on his way to Usagi's room. He had a mission to accomplish, and with everyone but him and Chibiusa out of the house for one reason or another, and their lessons starting later than usual today due to Mr. Hino having to run errands around town, now was the perfect time to begin Operation Spook Rabbit. Reaching the top of the stairs, he quickly hurried over to Usagi's room and used the cover that the wall separating the top of the door and the ceiling gave him to hide. Peeking over his cover, he saw his sister once again looking around the room trying to find any hiding place she hadn't found before that could be concealing the silver crystal. Why did he think she would find anything if she hadn't? Seeing that his sister's back was turned towards the door, Naruto quickly crossed the door and crawled along the ceiling to a spot directly behind her. Smiling, he thought, I'm so glad Kushina-sensei taught me the transformation technique. Looking behind him, he saw the shadow clone he had created give the door a thumbs up and move the Kodak camera into position. Prank tests ready to be done by his respectable teacher Kushina-sensei. Absolutely corrupt reading in all forms of pranks. Naruto went through a quick string of hand signs and a small puff of smoke later. A tarantula the size of a toddler was hanging from the ceiling. Seeing that its prey had finished looking under the bed and had moved back to search for hidden panels in the floor about 3 feet from the bed, the spider smiled somewhat before climbing the ceiling to a new position and dropping down behind its target. Chibiusa heard the small thump from the landing and turned to look around. Her eyes fell to the floor and widened as she let out the most beautiful sound Naruto had ever heard. Yeah. Chibiusa fell on her butt and backed up a few feet toward the bed. Hitting it, she turned around and jumped on it, then leaped across the footwell to the window seat on the other side, where she pressed herself as hard as she could against the glass. Naruto laughed, and unable to hold back the transformation any longer, reappeared in a burst of smoke, slamming his right fist into the ground as his laughter filled the house. About 15 seconds later, Chibiusa finally managed to stop her heart from trying to burst out of her chest and heard the laughter. Frowning, she jumped down from the window seat and walked around the bed. Seeing her brother laughing right where the spider was, a righteous feminine rage appeared and she yelled, Naruto! You absolute idiot! Naruto could only laugh harder as his sister launched herself at him, flipping onto his back to catch her, as she rained blows down on him with her fists. The shadow clone grinned as the two began to wrestle on the ground, the original still howling with laughter, and snapped a few more shots. Time skip. 30 minutes later, Chibiusa was still angry with him when it was time for them to head to the temple for their lessons. However, Naruto easily ignored that fact as he closed the front door behind him. Turning around, he smiled at the look his sister was sending him and said, Oh, come on sis, that was fun. Chibiusa gave a sharp phew before turning and running out of the courtyard. Naruto shook his head and thought, talk about holding a grudge. He then left after his sister wondered how long she'd be mad at him. Scene change. 300 yards from Hikawa Shrine. Naruto had easily caught up to his sister and, as always, when he wasn't taking her somewhere new, he had positioned himself at her right side. As they ran, he managed to get her to forgive him by promising to have her ice cream after the day's lessons were over. Now the two traveled in comfortable silence as they made their way to their lessons, or so they were until Naruto's passive detection skills gained from shinobi training picked up a presence hovering in the air above the temple. His head snapped up as he wrapped his arm around his sister and stopped. Chibiusa was surprised by the rapid deceleration and would have fallen if it weren't for Naruto's arm around her. Looking at her brother in confusion, she saw him staring at a spot just above the temple. "What's wrong, Naruto?" Chibiusa asked, wondering what had caught her brother's attention. "Probably trouble," Naruto said before switching from holding her shoulders to holding her right hand and dragging her into a nearby alleyway. Making sure they were the only ones there, he created 2 clones and said, "Okay, one of you needs to transform into sister while the other keeps her safe here. She'll know when it's safe to come out." The 2 clones nodded, and the one closest to Chibiusa grabbed her hand and began gently pulling her toward the alleyway while the other clone quickly transformed to resemble her. Chibiusa softly called out, "Be careful, Naruto," before turning and following the clone further down the small street. Naruto watched her leave before turning around and starting to walk toward the temple. A frown appeared on his face as he told the clone who had taken his place on the left side, "I'm starting to think the Hikawa Shrine is a nexus of destiny with all the events happening around it." The clone shrugged and said, "Who knows, it could be one." Looking toward where the presence still hovered, even though either of them could see it visually, he said, "I sense one of those sisters. I sense a trap," the original said. The clone looked at him and said, "Next move?" Naruto smirked as he said, "Spring the trap." The 2 laughed at the quote before they both began to run towards the temple. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the 2 saw Usagi begin to descend and looked at each other as they both thought of all the times she could finally start properly concealing her presence. The original made a mental note that he would have to start actively detecting lunar energy from now on whenever he wanted to find his future mother before he and his transformed clone met up with Usagi in the middle of the stairs. "Naruto, Chibiusa, what are you doing here?" Usagi asked in confusion before frowning and saying, "I thought your lessons were before lunch during the summer." "Not today. Mr. Hino had to run some errands around town and took them at 4 o'clock today," the original Naruto said. He then looked back and said, "You better hurry if you want to catch the bus back home." As if to prove his point, said bus roared past towards the nearby bus stop and Usagi panicked as she yelled, "Hey, wait!" and started running down the stairs. Naruto and his clone rolled their eyes before they began running up the stairs. As they reached the top and passed the entrance, they both heard laughter from above and looked up. Rapidly falling from the sky with the sun blocking her from view until she was 3 meters above them, was Katsuki. As she landed in front of her crouching clone, Naruto had to admit that the sun obscuring her was a neat tactical trick. But when she said, "Boo!" to the clone, he had to roll his eyes as her clone's gaze widened and began to take a step back in mock shock and fear. Katsuki wasted no time grabbing her clone and jumping back, landing 10 feet away holding him with her right arm under his shoulders and a flaming left fist next to his head as she said, "One wrong move, brat, and I'll rip his head off." Naruto's eyes narrowed as he said, "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Katsuki asked, her flaming fist burning a little brighter, and the clone flinched, still playing his part. "Yes. If you kill her, you're also losing your own life and you know it," Naruto said very seriously. Even if that was a clone of himself in that woman's hands, he wanted to make it very clear that he knew she couldn't hold his sister's possible death on him to force him to do what she wanted. Unfortunately, all bets were off when it came to everything else, so he still had to play it safe, as he didn't want her to know that she was a clone in his hands. Katsuki growled and was about to give a retort when the clone obviously decided it didn't like the situation it was in and raised both of its legs and then brought them down hard on its captor's legs while simultaneously knocking the flaming fist away from its head. Katsuki screamed in pain and her grip on the clone taught it enough that it was able to break free. It immediately launched itself forward as soon as its feet touched the ground. The clone did a somersault into a handstand at the end, which then turned into a series of flips as it made its way into a position behind its creator. Seeing the transformed clone now out of reach, Katsuki snarled and began gesturing to release a stream of fire toward them. But before she could even raise her right arm to shoulder height, Naruto was on guard with a flying kick that struck her solar plexus. Katsuki's eyes went wide as she folded like an accordion and was sent flying about 10 feet. Katsuki hit the ground and jumped once, flipping back once from the force and landing face down on the ground, where she slid down another foot before coming to a stop. Meanwhile, Naruto landed from his mid-air kick and immediately drew his sword as he rushed towards his downed opponent with the intention of permanently removing her from the war currently spanning 2 eras. Katsuki had little more than a second to sense the danger, and quickly moved away from the young lunar's downward slash at her neck. Coming out of her roll less than a foot away, Katsuki leaped to her feet and fired a kick at the young shinobi's sword hand in hopes of making the boy lose his grip on the sword. But instead of just taking the impact, the blonde used it to quickly bring his sword over his head, where he angled it at just the right angle to momentarily blind his opponent with a reflected glare from the sun. Katsuki gave a yelp of pain as her eyes immediately closed, and she instinctively took a step back from whatever caused her momentary pain. Naruto took advantage of this by completing the windmill motion of his sword arm as he stepped forward and sliced a thin gash along Katsuki's left leg, causing her to scream again before taking a small leap backward and to the side to get out of range of his retaliatory ice fire blast. Katsuki gritted her teeth in an effort to calm herself enough to not give in to the temptation of unleashing enough ice fire to raise the temple they were standing in. Instead, she focused on the brat who had caused so much pain and formed a whip of blue fire and sent it flashing into the blonde's position. Naruto's eyes widened briefly at the much faster fire before he coated his sword in water chakra and slashed through the whip as he jumped out of the way. It was a good thing he did, as all his sword did was cause the whip to wrap around him, which wouldn't have sliced him so neatly in half if he were still in his previous position. Naruto allowed himself a moment to raise an eyebrow at the vicious whip wrapped multiple times around his sword before looking back at Katsuki and jerking his wrist roughly, which knocked the whip out of her hands. As the whip dissipated, he swung his sword again and set it down at his side as he said, "Nice trick, here's mine! Moon wave!" The next thing Katsuki knew, the boy in front of her had flicked her wrist once more, sending it in an upward arc, and a 5-foot-long, vertically oriented lunar energy blade leaped from the blade toward her, leaving a small 2-inch trench in the ground below as it came at her with all the inevitability of a train wreck and slammed into her before she could even open her eyes, never mind think about dodging it. The impact of the highly condensed lunar wave sent Katsuki flying about 50 feet before she slammed into the ground and bounced 5 times before coming to an abrupt stop against the wall of the small storage building where the temple uniforms were kept. As Katsuki groaned and slowly began to stand up, Naruto frowned at the rather severe burn that occurred from below the top of her forehead down the inside of her legs to her feet. He had condensed the attack, but considering that almost all lunar attacks were intent-based, he would have thought that the damage would have been much less severe, since he had only wanted to get her out of any possible combat range of that rather fast-moving fire whip technique of hers. Putting it in conflict between yang and yin, Naruto kept an eye on his opponent while looking to where he could sense 2 chakra signatures he was getting used to working with. Seeing Sailors Mars and Moon standing on top of the roof of the building where the charms were sold, he shouted, "What took you so long? We had to get the civilians away." Mars replied even as he looked at Katsuki, who in turn looked at Mars and Moon when she saw them. Naruto blinked at that, since he knew there were no civilians in the area due to the late hour. Then he remembered Chad and Mr. Hino, and instantly felt stupid for such an oversight on his part. Yes, they were both black belts in at least one formal martial arts school, and who knows how many street fighting schools in Chad's case. But the two were completely untrained for the conflict he and the scouts were currently fighting in. Shaking those thoughts out of his head, he returned his focus completely to Katsuki as she snarled in an absolutely feral manner before a literal bonfire of ice fire erupted around her as she allowed her anger to take over. And for the first time in the war, the woman completely gave in to primal instinct. Naruto felt himself starting to get irritated as he thought, "Oh great, we've got a berserker using fire on our hands in an area filled with highly flammable wooden buildings." Sailor Moon and Mars gasped audibly as Katsuki snarled at them a second time before suddenly standing in front of them both, delivering a flaming blow to their heads. The two Celestials launched themselves from the roof of the charm shop and barely avoided having their heads blown off. As it was, some of their hair caught fire from the slamming fists, and they quickly hit the small embers even as they quickly leaped off the charm shop to gain even more space from their enraged opponent. Their attention quickly snapped back to the fight when they heard a shout of "Water style! Water bullet jutsu!" And a bullet of water tore through the temple grounds and slammed into Katsuki's face, snapping her head back and forcing her to stagger back a couple of steps. Katsuki slowly snapped her head back and began growling at Naruto, who frowned at the sight while muttering to himself, "Shit! I was hoping that would do more." Sighing, he thought, "Oh well, if water doesn't get her out of there, maybe lunar energy will." Katsuki roared and rocketed towards the blonde, who looked up at her with a calm look on her face as she began rapidly bringing her lunar energy to the surface. 5 feet from her target, Katsuki saw the blonde's eyes bleed silver. 3 feet away, A silver aura began to surround him, which at 2 feet suddenly erupted into a bonfire of energy, as his clothing suddenly shifted. A foot away from her target, Katsu's eyes widened as she suddenly found a fist encased in her stomach and silver eyes staring back at her. Naruto, his consciousness completely immersed in the power of his lunar energy, narrowed his silver eyes before his other hand shot out to meet Katsu's and Katsu's head. The bonfire meant her berserker rage was nowhere to be seen, but her face burned almost beyond recognition from the point-blank yang attack. Katsu groaned as she struggled to her feet. She looked around in confusion and said, "What happened?" "The last thing I remember was getting hit with that brat's attack. And then what happened?" Naruto said, abandoning his true form mid-sentence no longer needed as he had successfully eliminated his opponent's berserker rage with that last attack and was already feeling slightly exhausted due to the unusual use of said attack. Drawing his sword again, he said, "You went berserk and I got you out of there. The question is, will I have to do more, or are you going to run away like you always do when things don't go your way?" Katsu growled and said, "I'm going to make sure things don't go your way, brat." She put the word into action and sent out a wall of ice fire that was wide enough to take up the entire courtyard of the young lunar man, only to get the shock of his life when another smaller, but just as intense burst of normal-colored fire slammed into it and stopped him cold. When the flames died down, they revealed Sailor Mars standing in front of Naruto with an extremely angry look on her face that actually made Katsu back away in fear as Sailor Mars screamed, "You dare endanger this sacred ground with your actions? Oh, you're dead!" Sailor Mars put the words into action and stormed across the courtyard, pulling them apart faster than Katsu could properly react, and put her karate proficiency to good use as she began to bed down the taller woman, who quickly discovered that for every punch or kick she was able to block, 2 more managed to get through her guard, and those that did were for maximum damage. 5 minutes into the assault, Katsu had a broken bone in her right arm, 3 in her left arm. Both hands were absolutely useless due to both wrists being broken, 2 broken ribs, 4 more broken, a broken right cap, and come tomorrow she would be nothing but a large bruise, including the black eye she was now sporting. As Katsu struggled to remain standing on just her left leg, as Katsu fell to the ground not too well, Naruto grimaced and muttered, "And that's why I try my best not to anger Kushina-sensei when we're training." His still transformed clone walked forward to stand next to him, and the blonde saw the pink-headed clone nodding in a sagely manner. Katsu groaned in pain as she struggled to get off the ground, but was having trouble with only one limb that wasn't broken by any stretch. As he gritted his teeth against the pain and forced himself to use his broken wrists for support, Naruto saw Mars standing there and sighed as he thought, "Definitely trained civilian. A shinobi wouldn't just stand there when they had a rightfully dead enemy. Still, seeing how said enemy hasn't disappeared yet, maybe we can get something out of this fight." With a plan of action in mind, Naruto made his way to where Katsu and Mars were standing, which drew Mars and Moon's attention to him. Seeing the determined look in the young blonde's eyes and the still-drawn sword in her hand, Sailor Moon gasped and said, "Naruto, you can't kill her, she's defenseless now." Katsu looked at Naruto, her eyes widening as she struggled to get away from the boy who had proven time and time again that he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Said blonde looked at his soon-to-be mother and said, "You scouts are too soft, Moon. This woman has attacked time and time again not only you, but the members of this city as well. A city that you and your fellow scouts have chosen to defend. But don't worry, I don't plan on killing her. Unfortunately, given that she hasn't been evacuated yet and the killing intent I can sense coming from that guy over there, I don't think your ally feels the same." The 3 females looked in the direction of Naruto's thumb sticking out over his shoulder, and their eyes widened when they saw Rubius hovering a foot above the temple's entrance gate. Said redhead had a rather nasty scowl on his face as he looked down at Katsu's form and said coldly, "You disappoint me, Katsu, Rubius." Katsu whispered, but everyone heard her, and the tone of fear in that word. "I believe I told you what would happen if you failed me, Katsu, and yet failing me is exactly what you have done." Rubius continued coldly as his right hand rose and a ball of purple fire that churned like a sealed pot of boiling water appeared in it. He mocked his subordinate, tossed the ball to her, and when she clumsily caught it out of reflex said, "You have failed me for the last time, Katsu, and so you will be killed. If you return to base, you will be killed. If you leave this temple to go anywhere else, you will be killed. However, if you want your death to have even a little meaning, you will take that orb and kill everyone in this temple. You dash, lunar style, lunar bolt! Naruto interrupted and said as the lunar bolt slammed into Rubius's guts and launched him 20 feet higher into the air before he could stop himself. As Rubius pulled the bolt out and looked at the younger lunar present, he said the blonde snorted at the man and said, I swear all supernatural baddies are the same. Blah blah blah, doom and gloom, you've got no chance of getting out of this alive, blah blah blah. You all spend too much time talking. Case in point, lunar style, lunar storm. Another Naruto yelled from behind and above Rubius and spun around in shock just in time for the imitation attack to slam into him and explode in a series of sunbeams that slammed into the redhead's smoking body beyond the door and right into the other, now untransformed clone's sword. Rubius screamed as the clone's blade slashed through his lower spine before the clone beamed natural chakra through his sword and the man began to convulse. The clone then brought his sword down, and Rubius's unconscious form slid out and hit the ground with a thud before disappearing in a burst of black fire. Seeing this, the two clones scattered, telling their brother what was currently happening, while the original sheathed his sword and turned to Katsuki, who was still holding the fireball in her hands as she looked at him with wide eyes. Naruto frowned and said, Now that that's settled, you have two options here, Missy. You can try to go out and fight like that asshole wanted, which probably won't work by the way. Or you can leave a group that obviously doesn't care if you live or not and help us instead. Either way, if you don't let me seal that unstable grenade in your hands, there's going to be trouble for all of us. Katsuki's face went through a range of emotions as she struggled to make a decision before looking down at the pomegranate, and hesitantly holding it up, she said, Here. Naruto nodded before walking over and removing his backpack from his shoulders. Unzipping it, he took out a scroll and a pen containing sealing ink as Sailor Mars said to Katsuki, Believe me or not, you're actually making the right call on this. This temple is built on a power line that is primarily aligned with the element of fire. If that thing were to explode, it could cause a chain reaction that would have spread through the power line, doing untold damage along its entire length. So basically this could have made a giant volcano. That's comforting, Naruto said before the fireball shot into the storage seal he had made and quickly rolled the scroll up and put it back in his pack before taking a couple of steps back and continued. Potential city destroyer gone now. Do you plan on just keeping quiet and trying to fight us in your condition, or can we start having a decent conversation with you now? Katsuki's violet eyes lifted from where she had been staring at the scroll holding the elemental grenade to meet Naruto's calm sapphire and said, I have nothing left with the others, I will cooperate. Naruto studied her for a moment before his hand returned to his pack that he hadn't put down yet, and he took out his communications array and placed it on the floor so that its projected image would catch everyone present. An instant later, the image of the Hokage's office appeared, showing Minato reading a scroll on his desk with Kushina reading over his shoulder. Their eyes instantly lifted as they felt they were being watched by someone other than the Anbu guards hiding in the shadows of the room, and Minato began to roll up the scroll as he said, Report. Naruto's spine straightened as he said, Sir, we have an injured deserter willing to provide us with information on the invaders. I request permission to send her to the village so she will be safe from any assassination attempts the enemy might attempt. Minato's eyes turned to look over Katsuki's battered form before returning to Naruto and saying, Permission granted. Set spatial coordinates for room 5 in the TNI building and we will heal her before beginning interrogation immediately afterward. Naruto frowned at how quickly his teacher was willing to accept Katsuki and said, Did something happen, sensei? Normally you would think about something like that for at least a few minutes before deciding. Both Minato and Kushina frowned and Minato tapped the scroll the two of them had been reading as he said, Unfortunately, something happened. Yesterday there was a surprise attack on Port Kirian by the invaders. Just under half of the ships that were there during the attack were destroyed. If it weren't for the Infinity being stationed there to resupply, the damage could have been much worse. In response, the daimyo ordered that the invaders' forces be treated as hostiles and have begun to mobilize their forces. Any information your defector can give us would be appreciated. Naruto frowned at his teacher's words. When he left his time at home, the invaders seemed content to leave the elemental nations alone until they conquered Crystal Tokyo and the lands they ruled. It was rather foolish to fight a war on two fronts if it could be avoided, so most had assumed that as long as Crystal Tokyo remained, the elemental nations would be safe. Apparently, this was no longer the case. Shaking his head of those thoughts, Naruto said, Fine, say no more. Reaching into his shirt collar, the young lunar man pulled out his time key and pointed it at Katsuki. who eyed the temporal tool with a wary gaze and said, "Ma'am, we may have been enemies, but rest assured I had nothing to do with how irregular this is going to be." "What?" Katsi asked before a burst of pink energy shot out of the key and slammed into her, and the purple-themed woman disappeared in a puff of pink smoke that quickly dissipated without a trace of said woman. The hologram showing the Hokage's office lit up yellow immediately afterward as the Hokage used his famous Hiroshin technique to go to the TNI building, and his wife sat quietly in the now empty chair. Kushina cracked her neck to the side with one hand while taking out a blank scroll and an ink brush with the other and said, "Please continue, Naruto." Naruto nodded and continued his report, telling his teacher everything that happened, ending with the prank he had played on his sister that morning. Kushina wasn't the only one who smiled at his story, as Uzumaki, now untransformed, was struggling to breathe from his laughter. However, Rei had a frown that only grew when Kushina said, "I hope you took pictures." Rei frowned as Naruto nodded and said, "I'll send the pictures once they're developed." Rei's growl drew everyone's attention to her as she looked at Kushina and said, "I can't believe you would encourage your student to torment her sister like that." Kushina raised an eyebrow at the temple guardian and said, "I don't think a simple practical joke that left no lasting effects could be called tormenting. Stop being a stick in the mud, miss." Everyone heard Rei's jaw hit the floor even as Usagi nearly ruptured a gut as she started laughing at her friend again as Kushina turned to Naruto and said, "Keep up the good work, Naruto. With any luck, the information your defector will give us will allow us to wrap things up before the year is out and you and your sister will be back in the time period where you belong. I'm looking forward to it. There'll be a lot less drama when we get back. And that's saying something considering what some of the others are like," Naruto said with a smile. Kushina matched his smile as she said, "Indeed. See you then, Naruto." With those parting words, the hologram shut off and Naruto placed his hand back on the device and began tapping 10 symbols in a seemingly random order, as she said, "That Rubius character should have had plenty of time to get to your base for medical treatment. See where he is?" Usagi frowned and said, "How do you plan to do that?" Naruto looked over his shoulder at her with a smirk on his face and said, "My clone did more than run the guy through with his sword. He also managed to hit him with a miniature tracking seal." Turning back to the device as it began to power up again, the young blonde continued, "With that, we should be able to determine where the invaders are right now and come up with a plan of attack." The communications device finished displaying the tracking seal data and a series of numbers scrolled down the device's screen as it linked up with a local satellite and combined the information it received with a set of GPS and elevation coordinates. Seeing the coordinates, Naruto's smile faded and he said, "Well, that can't be good. What's wrong, Naruto?" Usagi asked with her head tilted. Gesturing to the coordinates in front of him, Naruto said, "If these coordinates are correct, and considering how difficult it would be to detect the tracking seal, I have no reason to doubt them. The invaders' base is only 200 feet above the tallest building in Tokyo's main financial district. But how can that be possible? Surely someone would have noticed some flying fortress hanging in the sky," Rei said with confused eyes. "Not if it's hidden. Don't forget these guys come from 1,000 years in the future, so their level of technology is literally centuries ahead of everyone else in this time period," Naruto said as he tapped another seal on his device, which proceeded to switch from coordinates to images, and a top-down image of the shopping district appeared. Pointing at the building where the base was located, he continued, "They're most likely using this building as a reference point to stay below the lowest allowed altitude for any flight over Tokyo so they won't be detected by a plane crash, and all of the communications going on in Area 24/7 would most likely cover up any signal their base puts out." "That's great and all, but if that's the case, how do we get there? I mean, it's hard to attack a base you can't reach," Rei asked. Naruto frowned as he turned off the hologram and placed it back in his backpack. Turning around as he put the pack away, he said, "You're right. I'm afraid just having one set of coordinates isn't going to cut it. Fortunately, we have access to a computer that should be able to break through their layers. I'm willing to bet my mustache markings that Ami's Mercury computer can give us a better idea of what we're dealing with. So while I take Chibiusa home, you two find Ami and have her scan the base. We'll meet at Usagi's house in 2 hours to start planning. Sound good?" The two girls exchanged glances before nodding, and the three of them ran off. Omake 4. Who says dead men don't tell tales? Neo Queen Serenity of Crystal Tokyo could only watch alongside 500 other lunars as 10 ancients surrounded Celine, electricity shooting up their arms and into the girl's brain through hand contact. The experience was obviously uncomfortable for said lunar, as evidenced by her trembling, but the young ruler took it with gritted teeth, not a sound escaping her lips. Finally, after 15 minutes, the electricity rushing into Celine's body stopped and her body relaxed. The ancient leader caught her body before it could fall to the ground and said a few words, earning a nod from his extremely distant descendant before the rest of the ancients gave them some space. As the rest of the lunars who participated in the moon telephone game also began to split into different groups to have related conversations, Serenity approached and said, "How is she, Lord Kamaya?" Tai Kamaya, lead scientist of the Ancient Dragon's Bane project, looked at Celine with a thoughtful look and said, "Well, her brain was able to properly download, for lack of a better term, all of the required information without writing about anything important in the process, so she should be able to help your people build dragon banes when she leaves the lunar scape. Unfortunately, she'll be twitching for about an hour once she does, but that should be the only side effect." Turning to Serenity, he said, "Aside from that, are you sure you don't want something for your own trouble? We could give you an ion beam weapon or an electromagnetic shield that would make those invaders think 5 times harder about what they were trying to do." Serenity's lips twitched even as she shook her head and said, "Tempting, but with my corporeal form currently encased in crystal to replace our currently unavailable silver crystal, I can't risk leaving my hibernation cycle for any length of time, and my 2 children are currently in another time to keep them safe, so I can't pass on the information to tell my scientists how to create them. Perhaps if we had access to the gold crystal we could risk it, but that temperamental hunk of rock hasn't deigned to manifest itself in 2,000 years, so no dice on that count. Too bad," the elder said before shaking his head and continuing. "Well, we may not be able to help you with your forehead, but we can help repair young Solaris's rifle chamber before we leave." "Who are you calling Yum?" said Lunar, a tall man with bright golden hair and glowing red eyes called from where he was talking to a group of 6 other scientists. Tai snorted and said, "I'm calling out the idiot who decided a gyroscope would be the best way to stabilize a soul in transit when a simple rifle setup coupled with a midlife mid-phase pulse would work just as well with a lot less hassle, young man." Solaris blinked and said, "Wouldn't that leave the user with a migraine for the next 12 months and glowing for just as long?" Tai snorted again and said, "Only if you don't encase the inside of the rifle with a 2-inch thick layer of lead." Solaris tilted his head and said, "That might work. Yeah, I could, okay? Serenity, would you like to join us?" Tai asked as she started walking toward where the remains of the chamber were. Serenity shrugged and followed her. Who knows, maybe she could learn something. Chapter 15. Second Conversion. Author's Notes. While watching this episode to transcribe part of it, I couldn't help but notice how poorly the drawers kept the girls' positions sometimes. During the chess match between Usagi and Ami, Chibiusa and Makoto are in bed with Luna one moment, then Makoto is to Ami's right with Chibiusa between the 2 players, and then the next shot with just Makoto and Ami has the 2 switching positions. Beginning of the story, Tsukino household, Usagi's bedroom. Chibiusa was being kept busy by a Naruto clone on the floor above while a war council was going on one floor below, kept secret through the sound-canceling seals provided by the shinobi-trained Lunar. He said as Lunar rubbed his temples as he said, "Let me get this straight. Your computer can detect that something is over the tallest building in the shopping district, but it can't even give you an outline of the object, never mind an interior or even an external scan." Ami nodded as she gave the computer in her hands a look as if she'd glued a cushion to her seat when she'd gotten up to go to the bathroom. It was quite a look. Looking back, she said, "Whatever cloaking technology or magic these invaders are using, it's very sophisticated and extremely effective. It literally took me dozens of different scans before I found a single energy signature that didn't belong on the premises. That tells me something was there, and even then, it's such a dark ES that none of today's scanning equipment looks for it. No authority, no scientific knowledge. BKPP IFRS. Naruto said before screaming when Usagi pulled her ear away from where she was sitting on the bed next to him, and said, "And it's stide bfsy ytmjfw fsdrtwjtl ymfy psitl qfslzfsl jkwdrdtz frnhqgfw?" When Naruto nodded and said, "Sure, ma'am." Usagi let go of her ear before looking up and noticed her fellow scouts looking at her in confusion and Artemis with an amused look in her eyes while Luna looked at Naruto disapprovingly and asked, What were you and Naruto saying? It seemed like nonsense to me." Minako asked, and the others nodded. Even Ami looked confused. Artemis laughed and said, Naruto just cursed Lunarian, and Yasagi told him to leave. Lunarian? The girls asked, and Luna replied. It was the language used by the members of the Lunar Kingdom before the unification of the 9 planetary realms, though they still used it when speaking exclusively to each other. Understandable really, since every child could instinctively say it before they turned 2 thanks to a full moon spell one of the ancients once cast. Clearly, Usagi's descendants had somehow reclaimed the language and either taught the language to their descendants or, more likely, relaunched it on Earth. I didn't even realize I was speaking another language, Usagi said in surprise. Luna shrugged and said, Well, you are the reincarnation of Princess Serenity. Clearly the spell carried into this life. As interesting as it is, we've gotten a bit sidetracked, Makoto said before looking back at Ami and saying, It seems to me that unless we can force these Niga creeps to drop the cloak, we can't teleport away without worrying about whether we'll become part of one of their walls. At Ami's frown and nod, all the scouts frowned as well, and Minako sighed and said, So until these guys make another move, we're stuck in a holding pattern again. Can't we use the coordinates from the tracking seal? I mean, they're literally the location of the boss of those sisters, so clearly they'll be in one room. Naruto asked, his head tilted. Ami shook her head and hummed a negative comment as she said, Too risky. Without a way to tell if he was in the center of the room or leaning against a wall, we still couldn't teleport safely. Naruto looked thoughtful and said, Would it help to have diagrams? All the girls blinked and Ami said, It definitely wouldn't hurt, but where are you going to get them? Naruto looked at them all and said, Katsuki is being interrogated in Konoha. I'm pretty sure part of that discussion will be everything she knows about their base, including floor plans. Next time she reports after enemy action, I can ask for a copy. Alright, this might work, Minako said with a smile. I just might, Ray said, nodding. And with that, the meeting between the Sailor Scouts ended and the meeting of 5 friends and their cats began. Naruto left the room a minute later. Time skip. The next day, Naruto and Ami were facing off in combat on a field of black and white. Watching their chess match were Usagi, Chibiusa, Luna, and Makoto, who were watching from Usagi's bed next to the table they were using. As Naruto moved a knight, he said, I should introduce you to the Nara clan sometime. They all love strategy games like Shogi and Go, and with all the times you've beaten me today, you could probably give them enough head and air. A challenge to last a year, maybe 2. Ami's cheeks fluttered a little as she said, Oh, I'm not that special. I just like to play around once in a while. You're not that bad at this, Naruto, said Boy, absent-mindedly tightened the straps of his backpack that he had kept on him since he woke up, even as he glanced at her sideways and said, You've beaten me 15 times in 15 games. Yeah, you know, you're so good at this, you should think about becoming a pro at it, Makoto said with a smile as she crossed back and then settled down next to the blue kitchenette. Usagi doing the same with Naruto and Chibiusa standing right in front of the bed. Ami's cheeks darkened further as she placed her right hand on her chin and said, Oh, I'm not that good. Come on, Ami. With your moves and me promoting you, we could make it all the way to the national championships, Usagi said, raising her right hand. Yes, but I don't play enough for that, Ami said dismissively. Makoto stood up and said, Come on, Ami, we have to go. Ami looked at her watch and said, I almost forgot. Let's go see the new Chess Rook. What's that, a new store in the mall? Usagi asked, confused. Ami shook her head slightly and said, better than the mall. Better than the mall? Usagi asked, unsure if such a thing was possible. Chibiusa and Naruto looked at each other, and both thought wasn't that the name of Mercury's second house in Crystal Tokyo. Scene change. Enemy base. The mirror the 3 remaining sisters and Rubius were looking at was filled with static. Birdie nervously bit her right thumb as she said, I don't understand. How can he not locate Katsuki? Even if she were dead, this should show us where her body is. Unless there's no body left, Prisma said darkly, a crooked smile on her face. Avery glanced at the eldest sister and said, Do you think Moonbrat didn't just take her sword and turn it to dust? Prisma shrugged and said, Well, we've all seen how protective he is of rabbits. The 3 sisters couldn't help but direct their eyes toward Rubius's right arm, even as the man frowned at the reminder, while they all felt phantom pains where said sword had made its bite known. Rubius shook his head once sharply and said, Enough with Katsuki, it's no longer important, it's time to get back to work. The hologram projector in the center of the room lit up, displaying a tower-shaped spire, and continued, I've just located another crystal point. It's located here. We can't afford to mess this one up. Don't worry, Rubius. I'll get it for you. You can count on me, Birdie said as he slid through a mirror with a gesture. Birdie won't be able to do this alone, Prisma said with a frown. Oh, let her go. If she doesn't make it, we can always finish the job, Avery said dismissively. Good idea, Prisma said with a smile. I'm counting on you, Rubius said, and once the two girls recognized him, they smiled and thought to themselves, the vain, foolish fools don't know I'm just using them. Pawns in my game will be discarded when they're no longer useful. Brace yourselves, you stupid idiots. Scene change, chess rook. That's a great tower, Naruto said, craning his neck to see the top. Chibiusa hummed in recognition, not nodding since her neck was just as craned. Ami hummed as she said, this was built by a man who loved chess more than anything. Next week, as part of the grand opening, they're holding a big chess tournament. The winner will be named Junior World Champion for the year, Naruto blinked and said. Does this guy really have that kind of attraction in the chess world? Ami nodded and said. He got the personal endorsement of it from world-class champion Magnus Carlsen. Wow, Chibiusa said in amazement. This guy must really be up there if he was able to talk to the boss face to face. Ami, then you should totally enter this. It would be so easy for you, Makoto said, and Yasagi nodded as she said, yeah, come on Ami, this is your big chance. I don't know if I'm good enough. I've always played for fun, never been to a real tournament, Ami said once again, blushing. Spoken like a true loser, a voice said from behind him, and without turning around, Naruto said, this is coming from the woman who wore a checkerboard dress while visiting a chess tower. Yasagi and Chibiusa laughed when they saw that Naruto was right. He said the woman had an angry look on her face while Makoto blinked and said, wow, Naruto, how did you know what I was wearing without looking? Naruto pointed to the glass doors and windows on the first floor of the tower, about 75 feet away, a short flight of 6 steps away, and said, I saw his reflection as he walked toward us. Wow, really? You have some pretty good eyes there, kid, Makoto said with a bit of awe. Naruto shrugged in easy dismissal. As I was saying, the woman said with a snort, if you're not playing to win, you shouldn't even bother playing. Winning is definitely where it's at, you know? Says who? Yasagi asked, almost sounding insulted. Who are you anyway? I thought a good sport was enjoying the game no matter what, win or lose. I'm lucky I don't have to be a good sport, the woman said, drawing dissatisfied hums from the girls before saying, oh, look at the time. I have to go. There's another championship trophy over there with my name written all over it. What's the rush? The tournament isn't for another week, Naruto said, finally turning around and looking at the woman, pain flashing in her eyes even though no one else could see it thanks to his short stature and the fact that his sister wasn't looking at him at the right angle. The woman gasped for a split second and her eyes widened briefly when she saw his face. But before any untrained civilians could detect it, she calmed her excitement and said, oh, you silly boy, don't you know the best thing? The seats in the house are ordered on a first-come, first-served basis. The woman began to walk past the group, and as she entered the building she waved and said, I'll see you later, maybe I'll give you an autograph once I've won. Oh, I'll see you soon, invader, Naruto thought with a frown, a shadow clone forming on the opposite side of the giant pawn his group was standing next to and instantly performing a smokeless replacement technique on it before sinking into the ground to follow the woman. Honestly, how many people wore their hair in a braid both across their forehead and over their right shoulder? Apparently, she was arrogant enough not to think that he hadn't recognized her after all the times they'd clashed before. Naruto was going to have to make sure to disabuse her of that notion as soon as he could safely engage the bad little sport without witnesses. Now that's what you call an attitude, Makoto said with a frown, and Yasagi nodded as she said, a very bad one. Ami simply chose to stare at the still open door with a frown. Time skip. A couple of hours later, in the currently empty room where the final match of the upcoming chess tournament was to be held, Birdie, once again in her gymnast outfit, entered the center of the room and said, this seems like the best place to start. She began to raise her right hand and channel her negative energy only to let out a scream when a voice yelled, Lunar net! And a net of light slammed into her side, wrapping around her several times, pinning her right hand to her chest and knocking her feet to the ground. What the hell? Birdie asked with wide eyes as he began to struggle to become mortal still with a pale face and wide eyes when he heard, You didn't actually think I didn't recognize you when we were outside, did you? Her eyes lifted from the floor to the entrance of the room where Naruto was extending his hand towards her, his crescent moon mark visible. Stepping into the room with his hands still outstretched, he continued. You girls seem to be of the opinion that no one can recognize you just because you changed your clothes. I'd say next time you change your hairstyle, dye said hair, and put in some color-changing contacts, but there won't be a next time. Birdie's terror at what the 5-year-old with murder in his eyes was going to do to her turned to sweet relief when she heard a welcoming voice say, Oh, I think there will be. And her 2 remaining sisters appeared in front of her. Prisma and Avery looked ready to tear Naruto apart as Prisma continued. I've been looking to pay you back for everything you've done to us, brat. Now surrender and I'll make your death a swift one. Naruto simply raised an eyebrow before there was a puff of smoke behind him, and when he cleared the room behind him it was filled wall to wall with 5 rows of Naruto clones, all of whom simultaneously drew their swords with evil grins on their faces. The 3 sisters paled and Prisma laughed nervously as she took a step back and said, Again, we'll let you 2 settle this, by now. Avery nodded and hummed quickly before the 2 disappeared back to where they came from. Birdie yelled their names in a panic, her terror once again making itself known as her sisters ran away. Naruto shook his head and said, Wow, I can really feel the familiar love from those 2. Birdie collapsed and said, Just get it over with and kill me like you killed Katsi. Turn me to dust so it'll be quick for both of us. Naruto walked forward, his basic illusionary clone technique vanishing like a mirage. Once close enough, he dropped to his knees and placed his left hand on Birdie's right cheek. He lifted her up so she was once again facing him. So what proof do you have that he actually killed her, huh? Birdie frowned and said, None of our visualization techniques could find her body, therefore, you must have atomized her with your lunar powers, unless you were looking at the wrong time. Naruto said, and Birdie gasped as he continued. Your sister defected after Rubius tried to kill her and I sent her to the Hidden Leaf Village for interrogation. Is Katsi alive? Birdie whispered with a small smile before frowning and saying, I can't believe Rubius tried to kill her. Well, I saw it with my own eyes, so take it from me when I say that I don't think I would hesitate to do the same to you if you somehow managed to get out of this and return to your base. You have 2 options. Here, Birdie, you can die here, or you can surrender and I'll send you when your sister is here. Naruto said with a frown. Birdie was silent for a long moment before sighing and saying, Prince Naruto Linares, I hereby surrender myself to you unconditionally. I hereby accept your surrender. Naruto said formally and dropped his right hand, the moon net also falling with the action, and used his left hand to place her in a sitting position even as he took out a pad of paper and a pen from his backpack. He watched as she wrote a quick note and handed it to him as he said, Give this to the first person you see. They'll treat you fairly once they read it and alert the higher-ups. Birdie nodded and accepted the letter, saying, Thank you for forgiving me. Naruto nodded before pulling his time key from under his shirt and pointing it at Birdie. A moment later, she disappeared in a flash of pink light, and he said, You girls can leave now. The Sailor Scouts entered from where they were hiding on the other side of the room's walls, and as he stood up, he turned to them and said, I thank you girls for letting me handle that on my own. It seemed like I had it right in my hand. Sailor Moon said with a smile to her future descendant. Yeah, did you see how fast those 2 Niga creeps ran when you filled the room with those clones of yours? Jupiter said with a smile. It was certainly an impressive sight, but I thought you could only make 3 copies of yourself. Mercury said, tilting his head. You're right, I can only make 3 shadow clones a day and still be an effective fighter. Basic illusion clones on the other hand. Naruto said with a smile. Jupiter burst out laughing and said, You mean you ran away from those 2 with nothing but holograms? Boy, are you a master bluffer! The rest of the explorers were quick to praise the lunar even as they powered down, and the group left the tower, happy for once that the problem had been solved without a major battle being required. Chapter 16. Assault on Konoha. Author's note, my apologies for being a day late. My family gathered at Mammoth Cave for the reunion, and the internet could best be described as unstable. Data can come in, but not out. Beginning of the story, the park, midnight. There was a fierce storm rumbling 5 miles away, and Naruto couldn't help but think the threat of extreme weather was fitting given what was coming as he stood in front of the uniformed Sailor Scouts, all staring at a specific spot on the ground. No one spoke, the scouts nervous of who was coming, Naruto eager to be reunited with people from the place he called home. At exactly midnight, at the appointed time, The sky lit up with a beam of red light that slammed into the ground in front of the group. A gust of wind ruffled their hair and caused all the girls to throw their arms over their eyes before it calmed down, and they rolled their eyes at the sight of 4 men in animal masks and a red-haired woman who had a smirk on her face as she said, What a rush, Kushina-sensei! Naruto said happily as he shot forward and jumped into the woman's arms for a hug. Kushina laughed as she held the blonde and said, Good to see you too, Naruto! She tilted her head and asked innocently, Is it just me or did you get shorter? Her response was Naruto bumping her shoulder with a pout which made her giggle and ruffle Naruto's hair with one hand before she pulled him down and joined the Anbu behind her in examining the Sailor Scouts in front of them. With a hum of interest, she said, So these are the Sailor Scouts of this period, huh? There are definitely at least some differences in their uniforms, especially Moon's. Well, they're still in their base forms right now. Naruto noted, earning a nod of acknowledgement from Kushina at that before Naruto said, Now, introductions, Kushina-sensei, this is Usagi Tsukino, Ami Mizuno, Rei Hino, Makoto Kino, and Minako Aino, Sailors Moon, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Venus, respectively. Kushina nodded to each girl as introduced, though she noticed they seemed surprised that Naruto gave her and the Anbu their civilian identities so easily. Naruto saw this as well and rolled his eyes as he said, Relax girls, these 5 are from millennia in the future, and they'll be back within 24 hours, not that you mind telling them something that from their point of view is ancient history. He has a point there, Mercury said, having already thought of that just before Naruto spoke, and the other girls also quieted down so Naruto could continue with the introductions. On the other hand, we have Kushina Uzumaki, one of my shinobi teachers and my adoptive mother while I'm away from my parents. Behind her is Anbu Team 5 consisting of Dog, Weasel, Hawk, and Snake. Each Anbu member nodded briefly when their mask was called. You forgot to mention Prankster Sensei Extraordinaire, Kushina said, causing both her and Naruto to giggle as Rei suddenly looked at the redhead disapprovingly. Seeing this, Kushina was suddenly in front of the Ravenet, moving so fast that none of the girls saw her move, causing them all to gain bug eyes as Kushina smacked Rei on the forehead and said, You need to loosen up once in a while, priestess, or you'll have permanent wrinkles by the time you're 25. Rei frowned and tried to pull her finger away from Kushina, only for the kunoichi to quickly pull it back and then immediately smack the girl's nose, giving a boop sound as she did before being reappeared again by Naruto, who was once again laughing, along with most of the other scouts except for Ami, but even she let out a giggle at the redhead's actions. Rei frowned at the older woman, who easily ignored it, and said, Now then, let's get to it. She tapped her foot against the ground and an intricate seal was created before activating, surrounding the group in an incredibly strong privacy barrier. Naruto couldn't help yourselves, Kushina said as she and Naruto each opened a pair of chopsticks and dug into their first bowls with enthusiasm. 10 seconds later, they were done, much to the Sailor Sensei's surprise, and Kushina flipped one of her chopsticks over to tap the dry end on the image projection seal, which lit up and projected an image of a crystalline object, followed a moment later by several blueprints. Pointing to her chopsticks with the images, Kushina said, These images are of the base the invaders are using in this time period. They were taken from the memories of the 2 invaders Naruto sent us through mind-walking techniques, so they can be considered 100% accurate. This mission is twofold: enemy elimination and resource acquisition. According to the intruder named Birdie, counting his 2 remaining sisters and their boss, there are currently less than 15 enemies on board, the remaining 10 being droids of various elementals. In BU Team 5, we will deal with the droids while we pursue Rubius, Prisma, and Avery. Sailor Scouts, you have Prisma and Avery. Our informants have asked us to capture the 2 sisters alive if possible, but when attacks start flying, your first priority is your safety, so hold nothing back. I will personally deal with Rubius along with Naruto. Once our targets are handled, we will move on to the second part of the mission. Kushina touched some of the pages in front of her, which were revealed to be diagrams and instructions of some sort as she said, We have been given instructions on how to blow up the enemy base. Once all targets are neutralized, we will be disabling its IFF functions before using its temporal drives to send the base back to Konoha's time period, where it will begin being engineered by a team of specialists that Crystal Tokyo sent for that exact purpose. Once the base has been delivered, Naruto will transport the girls and himself here using his time key. If he uses it right, then the girls shouldn't lose more than an hour or two between time jumps. Any questions so far? Yeah, I have one, Venus said, frowning as she continued. If these creeps are from the future, what's stopping them from knowing we tried? Mercury actually sent this message when he said, knowing about our attack and doing something about it are two different things from Venus, especially if the invaders can't currently send a signal back in time saying they're under attack at a certain point. I imagine our current allies have a way to prevent that signal from being transmitted. Otherwise, we'll most likely not attempt this mission. The Ice Maiden has it in one, Kushina said, pointing her chopsticks at Mercury, who blushed a little at the name she gave him before the redhead quickly inhaled the rest of her third bowl, leaving the scouts wondering when she had eaten the second bowl during that brief break in her speech. Naruto already had all 3 bowls neatly stacked and had a sandwich in one hand and a steaming cup of tea next to the other on the table. Kushina reached into one of her pockets before placing her hand back on the table, placing down a half-fist-sized egg-shaped device with a pair of very small antennae coming out of the pointy end. Tapping it with a single finger, Kushina said, "This is a jamming device created by the Crystal Tokyo technical team. It will block all temporal transmissions in this time period, in or out, for a distance of 250 miles. From the time we arrived here, the intruders have been without communications with the rest of your group. According to our informants, we have 6 hours before they attempt to send their routine status reports and the like, and we realize they've been jammed. We have until that time to get on board and start giving them even more trouble. Complete communications blackout from that little thing?" Moon asked incredulously as she leaned forward to try to get a better look. "It's not really that surprising. Today's cell phone jammers are only 3 times larger, and Crystal Tokyo is several centuries in the future. I can't imagine how small their underground technology could be," Mercury said, as she too studied the device curiously. Kushina gave them their moment before getting the mission briefing back on track and beginning to go over the more specific details. Half an hour after it had started, the briefing was over and 11 figures leaped onto the roof of Tokyo's financial district. Wearing goggles that were sealed to hell and backed by Konoha's 3 best seal users working together to make them in time, the group quickly reached a spot directly beneath the cloaked base. Kushina led the way, quickly grabbing a horizontal spire with one of her chakra chains before wrapping more of it around the others once she was at the top, Sailor Moon having to cover her mouth with a hand to keep from screaming in fear and excitement as she shot straight into the air faster than a roller coaster. Once everyone was at the spire, the group quickly used an access hatch to enter the central section of the base. The Anbu team split off from the others to head to the area where the droids resided until they were used, while the scouts followed Naruto and Kushina as they moved towards where Naruto's tracking seal said Rubius was. 10 minutes later they were looking in a mirror which showed Rubius looking at the map of Crystal Tokyo with a frown. Kushina and Naruto had their brows furrowed, seeing that the sisters were sadly not in the same room. Naruto caught Kushina's attention and signed a track through loud noise strategy. Kushina considered for a moment before nodding and pulling out a blank scroll from her vest and placing her finger on it, causing a seal to write itself before tapping it on the edge of the mirror before holding 6 fingers up to the scouts before making a 0 with one hand before making an XY motion, then holding up 2 more fingers, then opening and closing her hand twice before tapping her ears in a loud noise signal. The sailor scouts nodded and Kushina activated the seal before firing into the room, the chakra chain already firing at Rubius's head with Naruto right behind her. Rubius let out a startled yelp as he barely managed to move out of the way of the chain, his shoulder taking a blow from the sharp spike, and he launched a rushing energy blast at the 2, even as his surprise at the enemies attacking him while in his cloaked base remained plain on his face. Kushina dodged out of the way of the enemy attack as she launched even more chains at her red-headed companion, forcing him to frantically dodge and weave, even going so far as to begin flying to avoid the attack. His distraction cost him, however, as Naruto dodged directly behind him and slammed his 2 joined fists into the top of his head, forcing him into the path of a chain that immediately struck his right shoulder and threw him back against the room and pinned him against the wall. Naruto had a smirk on his face as he landed easily before he and Kushina ran through hand signs and a wind-augmented fireball shot out from the 2 shinobi, and Rubius cursed as he ripped the chain out the side of his shoulder as he jumped out of the way. The fireball slammed into the wall and blew it away, either combatant paying it any mind as the 2 shinobi shot forward and began attacking their opponent in blistering taijutsu close-quarters combat, easily forcing Rubius onto the back foot as the 2 combined high and low combos through the ease granted to their teacher-student relationship. The Sailor Scouts watched in varying levels of awe as the two metaphorically tore through their opponent's defenses in hand-to-hand combat before flinching when a loud klaxon went off right next to them, even with their hands over their ears. The distraction caused Rubius to twitch, allowing another blast to pierce through his guard. Fortunately for the Scouts, the klaxon only blared for 30 seconds before the seal died down, the blue glow fading. Another 10 seconds later, and Mars saw Prisma round the corner of a nearby intersection at high speed. The redhead had just enough time for her eyes to widen in surprise at the sight of the Scouts before she had to dive to the floor with a scream of fear as an armor of fiery chakrams nearly cut her off. As Mars and Jupiter rushed to deal with her, Mercury saw Avery coming from the other end and sent a wave of icy water down the hallway. The shining aqua illusion was on target, and Avery was thrown backward with a surprised cry of pain, slipping as she landed and covered in a thin layer of ice that hung over her even as she broke it while struggling to stand. Venus slammed a crescent beam smash into Avery's shoulder as the two rushed at her, and she screamed in pain as the beam connected. Sailor Moon watched the two fights with a bit of lip trying to judge whether she should join one of the two fights. Back with Naruto and Kushina, Naruto had just scored a groin shot, and as Rubius involuntarily buckled slightly, Kushina wrapped a chakra chain around his right ankle and pulled it out from under him, sending him into the air and allowing Naruto to land a lunar energy punch to the back of his head. The energy detonated in a minor explosion and threw Rubius against a wall where he collapsed with a groan. Kushina scoffed and said, "Pathetic. Out of all the trouble Crystal Tokyo was having from you invaders, I was expecting a better fight than this. No wonder Naruto has been kicking ass in every fight he's had with you guys. From what I've seen, they're not really good at fighting in close quarters," Naruto said as he drew his sword, an action followed by Kushina as she formed one of several intertwined chain links, the incredibly thin outer links giving them a razor-sharp edge. Rubius growled as he forced himself to his feet. As he shakily stood up, he growled, "Damn you shinobi, I'll show you who's pathetic." His form began to glow red and his wounds began to visibly heal as he sneered and said, "You fools should never have tried to attack me inside my own base. Now watch as I use your reactor power to annihilate you." "Burk, you still talk too much," Naruto said coldly as his shining silver sword was pulled out from his right side while Kushina pulled out her chakra chain sword from her left. Rubius' form stopped glowing as his knees hit the deck before his torso followed shortly after, and he groaned in pain as he said, "How is this possible? How could I have lost on my own?" His last word never passed his lips as he slipped into unconsciousness. Kushina quickly placed him in a prisoner seal to prevent him from bleeding out before a Yamanaka could get their metaphorical hands on his memories, even as she gave Naruto a nod of approval. With the Scouts, Prisma slammed into a wall with a grunt of pain as Mars and Jupiter used their martial arts skills to dismantle her defenses almost as efficiently as Naruto and Kushina had done to Rubius. The green-haired sister had bruises all over her body, including 2 black eyes and a broken nose. She struggled to her feet using the wall for support only for her eyes to widen when she saw the 2 nearby Sailor Scout specialists send simultaneous kicks into her torso area. The kicks connected, and she spat out blood before her head snapped back as Jupiter slammed his fist into her forehead, and the back of her head hit the wall hard enough to knock her out and cause her to slide down into a depression. Avery fared better and worse in her fight due to the different fighting style of the other 3 scouts. Their whips were noticeably shorter, one barely a foot and a half long. There were shallow cuts on her arms, black marks all over her body from frostbite, and burns from her negative energy reacting violently to the positive lunar energy attacks. She was constantly forced back as Mercury, Moon, and Venus stood side by side and sent low-range attacks in a never-ending assault, Moon's lunar samban causing residual pain with each attack to the target, while continuing to hurt her even after their first contact. Eventually, Avery could no longer hold her whips in her hands and Moon ended the fight with a lunar wave that slammed into the second youngest sister. Moon exchanged triumphant smiles with her fellow scouts before they heard clapping and turned to see Kushina giving them a slow clap as she said, "Well done, girls, you've done an excellent job. Now bring the 2 of them over here so we can put them in stasis scrolls and we can head to the ship's command center." The scouts scrambled to follow her orders and soon the sky directly above the business center of Tokyo cleared once more as the base left the local time period. Chapter 17, Time-Traveling Tourists Part 1. Beginning of the story. skies over Konoha, to the sailor scouts who were looking at an observation port of the base. When the invader's ship cut its temporal impulses, nothing seemed so different as it hovered in the night air above a large expanse of architecture with a few lights scattered about the area. Then, spotlights suddenly turned on and they saw a mountain with 4 enormous faces carved into them, and jaws began to drop as the ship began to fly forward and then land on said mountain. Naruto and Kushina smiled at the looks on the scouts' faces as they entered, the base being stretched out with thin but incredibly durable rods and burying 10 feet of the base's lower spire into the ground with a thud. Almost before it had even landed, shinobi were running up the landing struts, some of them with people who were obviously technicians piggyback style, and looking rather amused as they did so. Ami noticed something and said, "Why aren't they bringing any equipment? I thought they'd at least bring scanners for the first look through the base." Kushina touched the scroll containing everything they had used for the mission briefing and said, "They have everything in sealing scrolls. You can put an entire building and everything in one scroll if it's neat enough." Sailor Moon's eyes almost sparkled as she said, "You mean I could keep an entire restaurant's worth on my person at all times?" Naruto and Kushina let out snorts of amusement as Sailor Mars gave Sailor Moon a cross look and said, "Seriously, Sailor Pig, they just said they can break the laws of physics and the first thing you think about is how much food you can keep on your person. Hey! I think knowing you'll never need to be hungry while you're out of the house is a great thing," Sailor Moon said with her arms crossed and a stern look in her eyes. "It would be nice not to have to carry a bunch of ingredients or cooking tools all the time while camping," Sailor Jupiter said, the resident cook tilting his head. Sailors Mercury and Venus looked at each other before all the scouts suddenly jumped as there was a flash of yellow light behind them. Everyone in the observation room turned around and saw 3 people right in front of them: a tall, blonde man in a fire-tipped white coat who could have been Naruto's future, a tall, white-haired man who looked like he could be a human bear's skin, and a blonde woman with impressive assets. Naruto smiled and shot forward as he said, "Sensei!" The Naruto lookalike chuckled as he easily picked Naruto up in a hug and said, "Nice to see you too, kiddo." The bear-like man smiled as he ruffled the blonde's hair and said, "I heard you've been having quite the adventure without us, Gaki." He then looked at the girls and thanked them once more. "And with those lovely ladies too, I'm coming along." His last word was cut off when he found a fist in his gut and slumped to the floor as the lady snorted and said, "Ignore that idiot Naruto." Frowning and smiling, she continued, "I read the report on your little exorcism effort, well done." Naruto rubbed the back of his head as he let out a chuckle and said, "Thank you, Tsunade-sensei." Snapping his fingers right after, he said, "Oh right, introductions." Jumping out of his lookalike's arms, he turned to the scouts and said, "Scouts, these are some of my other teachers. The lady is Tsunade Senju, Konoha's head medic. The man who could be mistaken for a bear is Jiraiya of the Toads, our resident spy master. And finally we have Minato Namikaze, Kushina-sensei's husband, my adoptive father, and last but not least, the Yandame Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village." All of the Sailor Scouts bowed respectfully to the man, but as soon as that was done, Moon looked at him and Naruto in disbelief and said, "Are you sure he's just your adoptive father? He's the same person as an unrelated ward and guardian." There was laughter from all the shinobi present, and Minato rubbed the back of his head in the same manner as the young blonde in front of him, only adding to the same person, different time period analogy, as he said, "Yes, we've been getting a lot since Naruto first came to the village." With embarrassment turning to amusement, he continued, "But she also looks a lot like you. Clearly your genes will run strong in your offspring, Sailor Moon." Sailor Moon blushed at the implications of that statement, and Naruto laughed before saying, "Well, you obviously know which one is my ancestor, but the others are in order of joining the ranks of Sailor Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Venus." Each of the named girls gave indicators as they were listed. Mercury gave a slight salute, Mars gave a small priestess bow, and both Jupiter and Venus gave 2-finger salutes. With the introductions made, a few of the people in the room got back to business. Kushina quickly handed the prisoner's seal holding the heavily injured invaders to Tsunade, who quickly activated a reverse summoning seal on her person that took her back to her office in the Konoha main hospital, and Jiraiya went straight into spy master mode. Picking Naruto up and holding him in one arm and a recording seal augmented notebook in the other, as he began giving Naruto a proper report now that he had him here in person, getting all the little painstaking details that never made it into written or vocal reports. Kushina and Minato exchanged glances with each other, having a quick but silent conversation before turning back to the scouts and saying, "Jiraiya will be with Naruto for a bit. Why don't we show you some beds so you can get some sleep, and then we can show you around tomorrow before you head back to your own time? But I thought we'd be back in our time just an hour after we left?" Jupiter asked, his head tilted. Mercury laughed as he took this and said, "We're time-traveling Sailor Jupiter. Spending a day here doesn't mean we lose a day in our time. In fact, if he wanted to, I'm sure Naruto could drop us an hour before we even meet Kushina and Anbu Team 5. Actually, I'd prefer if we spent a week here so you girls could get some halfway decent training in, preferably with Guy." Naruto called from where he was talking to Jiraiya, his trained shinobi ears easily hearing the conversation from across the room. Kushina laughed and called out again. "That's pretty harsh, don't you think? Moon and Mercury could use some stamina training." Naruto replied before turning his full attention back to Jiraiya. Minato sighed with a shake of his head and said, "If we didn't do DNA tests that showed he was 100% celestial, then I'd swear he was part Uzumaki." Kushina raised an eyebrow at her husband and said, "Would it really be so bad if he was actually descended from one of us?" Minato snorted and said, "Of course. It's bad enough that I made jokes under your guidance. I don't want to add your family's vitality to the mix as well." His response made the redhead laugh before the two were interrupted when Mercury said, "Excuse me, sir, what do you mean Naruto is a celestial? I thought he was a lunar." "He is," Minato said before adding, "Celestial is a term for a species of non-earthly origin. Naruto's mother is a lunar, while his father is a Terran, who, although you have to go back several eons to see, did not in fact end up on this planet, but rather migrated here after a rather nasty meteor strike knocked his original planet out of orbit." Sailor Moon blinked and said, "If it happened so long ago, how do you know?" Minato shrugged and said, "I've had quite a few interesting discussions with the boy's parents." Visibly changing course, he said, "We can discuss genealogies later, when the sun is truly rising. For now, let's get them into some nice beds before they fall asleep standing up." It was at that moment that the small signs of exhaustion the shinobi had noticed in the scout's body posture became known to the girls when Jupiter suddenly let out a yawn, the brunette blushing immediately after. Ever the night owl, Mercury gave his teammate an amused look before turning to Minato and bowing as he said, "Accommodation would be greatly appreciated, Lord Minato." Minato waved his hand quickly and said, "Please, you are not one of my citizens and honored guests. Minato, when you are in private it is fine." Mercury nodded at that before Minato gathered the scouts and Kushina around him and used his space/time jutsu to bring them all to the guest quarters of the Hokage Tower. Time skip. The next morning, 8 o'clock. Naruto let out a yawn as he walked towards the guest quarters where the explorers were staying, more to loosen his joint than any sign of tiredness. Jiraiya had kept him for 7 full hours, using a combination of ancient analysis techniques and a Yamanaka mind walker to glean every detail he could on the invaders. The fact that he already had 2 of the invaders to play with was irrelevant. In his line of work, there wasn't too much information. When he reached the door to the suite usually reserved for visiting dignitaries and their entourage, he made a slight snake-like slithering motion to open up every joint in his back before knocking. A few moments later, Ami opened the door, and Naruto blinked once in surprise to see her not in Sailor Scout form, but in a light blue version of the standard leaf shinobi uniform, complete with vest. There was even a forehead protector on her head, with the symbol of Mercury on it to boot. Ami blushed when she saw Naruto looking at him, and said, "All of our rooms had a uniform like this for us. The yandame said it was so we would have a memento of our time here when we returned home." She idly ran a hand over the sleeve on her other arm as she said, "It seemed polite to wear it." "I see," Naruto said noncommittally before shaking his head and saying, "Is everyone decent or do I need to wait a moment?" Ami stepped aside and said, "We're all dressed, so go ahead." Naruto nodded and walked inside, waiting for Ami to close the door and then following the bluinette into the suite's common area. All the other scouts were gathered there, eating breakfast that Naruto was just sure Makoto had cooked given the smell of some spices she liked to use, and every single one of them was dressed as Hidden Leaf Kunoichi, including Usagi. Naruto blinked at all the different colored uniforms and said, "Minato-sensei must have used a color-changing seal to get all those clothes the right colors so fast. What's really impressing me is how he got those Hayate made so fast." "Good morning, Kakashi-sensei." All the scouts stiffened before looking at where Naruto was. In fact, Leaning in the far corner was the silver-haired man, casually reading an orange-covered book. The Cyclops looked up and smiled at Naruto as he waved and said, "Hey, good to have you back for a bit, Naruto." Usagi's jaw dropped as she pointed at him and said, "How long have you been in there? How did you get in without any of us noticing? And what are you doing here?" Ray asked, his eyes narrowed, bristling at the thought of such a strange-looking man having been in an area where 5 young women had slept and showered without his knowledge. Calm down, girls, I've been in this room all night. Minato-sensei asked me to make sure no one came here that wasn't supposed to," Kakashi said, waving off the 2 girls' questions before turning his focus back to Naruto, and said, "And to answer your question about Hayate Naruto, Minato-sensei made the designs in preparation to make gifts for the Sailor Scouts of this time period when they visited for their next birthday before this whole invader business came up." "Oh, that makes sense," Naruto said with a nod of understanding. "Wait, Minato-sensei? You mean the Hokage was the one who taught you?" Minako asked in surprise. "Yeah, Minato-sensei had Kakashi-sensei as a student since he was a grumpy little chibi," Naruto chirped with a smile. Kakashi snorted and said, "Chikigaki, remind me again who won each match so far." Naruto smiled as he revealed his true form and said in a slightly toned voice, "I got an upgrade recently, sensei, wanna try it out?" By no means did he think he could actually beat the Jounin prodigy in a serious fight, but oh boy, would it be a fun beating. However, Kakashi just waved his hand negligently and said, "Maybe later. We wouldn't want to damage the tower now, would we?" Naruto returned to his base form and crossed his arms as he said, "I wasn't saying we should do it right away, so who are you taking me for, guy?" Kakashi shuddered and said, "Please don't think of Guy with your abilities in my head, Naruto, he's bad enough as it is." Naruto took a moment to consider what Guy could be a Lunarian and shuddered when he suddenly had an image of him as a male version of Sailor Moon and shuddered and said, "Fine, my bad. Never mention Guy with lunar abilities again?" "Agreed," Kakashi said seriously before looking visibly relaxed in the eyes of the scouts and said, "But it seems we've gotten sidetracked. I don't think you came here just to talk to me, right?" Naruto said before turning his attention back to the scouts and said, "I wanted to see if you 5 would consider using your current circumstances to increase your combat abilities." "You mean you want us to stay here for a while and train?" Minako said, crossing her arms as she spoke. Naruto spread his arms slightly and said, "Can you blame me? If you girls got some training, then you could defend your time period much more effectively. But wouldn't it be worth it to stay and get some training here?" "Yes, he could leave us at any time, but we'd still show signs of aging and wouldn't be able to explain such changes to our families," Ami pointed out logically. "And even if we spent a week receiving instruction, who would monitor our progress when we returned and make sure we weren't learning wrong?" The martial arts trained Ray asked logically. Naruto opened his mouth to respond to that before sighing and saying, "You're right, of course. Sorry girls, I guess I didn't think it through." Makoto walked over from his seat and knelt down to ruffle the boy's hair as he said, "Hey, don't worry kid, you just wanted to get us some help." Naruto frowned and said, "But I should have realized that just because I can take you girls to any point in your time period doesn't mean you can spend as much time as you want in this one. Naruto, you're only 5 years old, no matter how smart you are for your age, you can't expect to know the answer to everything," Ami said logically. Her answer still made him stubbornly cross his arms, though he didn't refute her. Sensing the tension starting to rise, Usagi clapped her hands a few times to get their attention and said, "Enough of this serious talk. I say Naruto, show us a day or 2 of relaxation before we have to head home." "I think that's a great idea. It would be quite boring for you girls to wait here until they return. Naruto and I could also show you what we see," Kakashi said as he closed his book with a soft click and put it away as he walked over. Seeing everyone's eyes on him, the blonde man shrugged and said, "Fine, I guess. Finish your breakfast, and then we can head out." Chapter 18, Time-Traveling Tourists, Part 2. Quick author's note. Sorry for the delay. I can't seem to get the steam going while writing this chapter. Beginning of the story, Konoha, lunchtime. The morning had been filled with visits to the main market and Naruto's favorite park. For lunch, they were eating at Ichiraku's ramen. While Naruto was eating, the scouts were laughing at a story Kakashi was telling. So there we were, Minato-sensei, Rin, Obito, and I, all crouching behind park benches as Kushina launched water balloons towards us at a speed comparable to one of her 21st century rotary guns. We couldn't get a balloon out when, Out of nowhere, this dumb little kid managed to rig a giant catapult that dropped 10 gallons of water onto his head from 1,500 feet away. Oh, the look on his face! Minako banged on the counter while Usagi fell off the stool and clutched her stomach as she showed why Ami called her a hyena. You're exaggerating. It was only 800 feet, not 15. Naruto said as he moved on to his 6th bowl of proper ramen. 8 or 15, that kind of accuracy is impressive, Naruto. Ami said once she was able to control her giggles. Please tell me you still have the catapult. Makoto almost begged with a smile. Naruto sighed from where he was trying to eat and said, I made it out of an old drum, some twine, and a long 2x8 using a park bench as a foothold. There really wasn't much to spare. All the girls stared at him with their jaws slightly open and their eyes wide before a moment later Ami said, How could I have gotten that kind of distance and accuracy with that? I used my thumb to point. Naruto said flatly, and Kakashi actually threw his head back and howled like one of his dogs when he saw the girls staring at his young student as if he were a purple dinosaur playing the tuba while balancing on a large circus ball. However, Naruto simply picked up his chopsticks once more and began eating, clearly indicating that his participation in this conversation was over. While controlling his laughter, Kakashi said very calmly as if he hadn't broken his laughter like he'd been pushed into a room full of laughing gas. There's a reason he's Kushina's prank apprentice, you know? Remind me never to get into a prank war with any of them. Usagi said sagely and all the other girls nodded in agreement. Kakashi laughed at that and then, to Naruto's relief, the topic shifted from his past exploits to Kakashi's duels with his eternal rival Might Guy, finally allowing him to return to his ramen. Once lunch was over, Kakashi led the scouts on a tour of the important places for a shinobi. With some exceptions, of course, they saw the ninja academy, the huge main gates, the hero monument. Ray said a formal prayer for the peaceful repose of the dead while they were there, the hospital and the main library, though the scouts were not allowed past the student section of the academy. When it was time for dinner, Kakashi and Naruto led the scouts to the Akimichi district, more specifically to the restaurant run by the clan head's wife. The dinner gained a spectacle when Naruto realized that the Nara clan head and his son were also visiting the restaurant, and managed to convince Ami to play a game of chess against Shikamaru first, and then against his father. True to what Naruto had thought when he went up against Ami across the board, the girl was terrifyingly good. The young pediatrician in training was able to hold off the two Naras for 3 hours before Shikamaru's mother arrived and dragged them home to do some chore or another. While Ami had been busy using her chess skills, Makoto had been swapping recipes with Choji's mother. The Jupiter Explorer was already a surprisingly good sponsor with plans to open a bakery/cafe once he finished his formal education. Choji's mother seemed delighted to share, especially since some of the recipes had never been heard of by her clan, so they would likely be a big hit for her restaurant. That night, the explorers went to bed with full stomachs and stories of missions taken provided by the Akimichi. Time skip. The next morning, Training Field 7. All the scouts were sitting on the ground in front of the 3 wooden logs, while Minato and Kushina sat on top of said logs. In front of the group was Naruto standing next to Kakashi. Minato studied his burden for a moment before saying, Now remember, Naruto, while this match serves as a demonstration of how powerful your true state is, I don't want you to overexert yourself, so don't do anything that will render you unconscious once you've powered down. Yes, sensei, Naruto said with a nod before he and Kakashi turned to see each other. There was a flash of silver and Naruto's clothes changed. The shorts and shirt he preferred to wear became the silver jounin-style attire, while his ever-present backpack became a short-sleeved jacket which only enhanced the uncanny similarity between his and Minato's appearance. The fact that his eyes were now silver instead of their usual blue made up for it somewhat. Naruto slightly shifted the forehead protector he now had on a bit before taking a starting stance, and said in a light dumb tone, Ready. Kakashi raised a visible eyebrow at the slight show Naruto had put on by changing forms before shrugging and taking his own stance. The two fighters stood still for a moment before Naruto surged forward at a speed that easily doubled what he was capable of before going back in time, and Kakashi's eye crinkled slightly in approval even as he easily caught the opening punch and knocked Naruto back just a bit. His eyes widened as he realized Naruto had used the contact to attach a line of lunar energy to him, and he flipped himself back into the air, spinning to slam it down on Kakashi's head. Kakashi blocked the kick only for Naruto to continue spinning with a moon blade in his right hand that seemingly sliced through his chest like butter. All the scouts gasped in horror only for them to let out sighs of relief as the Cyclops turned into a chopped-up log. Ma, that wasn't very nice, Naruto," Kakashi said casually from behind the blonde, calmly ignoring the fact that the temporarily extended moon blade was currently in a reverse grip less than 2 inches from his crotch, keeping him out of the man's arm's reach, and more importantly, the kunai in his hand from touching the back of the blonde's head. "Neither of them left me buried up to my head in the ground for 5 minutes after our last spar, sensei," Naruto said with amusement. "Fair enough," Kakashi said with a shrug before the two shinobi seemed to blur in the scout's eyes as Kakashi quickly drew a second kunai and began a kenjutsu match with Naruto, staying fast enough that Naruto had to form a second, albeit shorter, lunar blade in order to prevent his clothes from being shredded. 5 minutes and Kakashi jumped back to end the fight and nodded as he put away his kunai and said, "You've improved a lot with the sword while you were away. The Lunarscape's ability to communicate with past and future Lunars allowed me to get a lesson or two from some of my sword-using ancestors," Naruto said with a satisfied smirk. With the scouts out, Usagi made a mental note to ask Naruto to teach her how to access the Lunarscape at will, as getting more lessons on its abilities seemed like a good idea. Naruto was a good teacher, but he was still just a child after all. The adult Lunars would know more to teach him. "You're using all your available resources to learn, that's good," Kakashi said approvingly before starting to run through hand signs and said, "Let's test your projectile interception skills next, Earth style, Mud Bullet Jutsu." Naruto also took a short 10-foot ninja leap to give himself a little more breathing room, landing with his arm outstretched and shouting, "Moon Saban!" The training grounds turned into a massive strobe light as a continuously replenishing barrage of light needles slammed into Kakashi's entire barrage of elemental jutsu. When Kakashi finally finished the technique 60 seconds later, there was a clearly defined line of mud 5 feet from Naruto with even more mud behind it. Kakashi nodded approvingly and said, "Good, now show me something impressive." The smirk Naruto had on his face would have been concerning if the blonde had been at least a Chunin. Instead, it merely made Kakashi raise an eyebrow as Naruto leapt into the air and formed a pair of white wings on his back to carry him 75 feet and stay there as he began to form a large, silver energy sphere the size of a beach ball. From his outstretched hands, all of the scouts felt their jaws practically hit the ground even as Usagi yelled, "It can fly?" Ami managed to be the first to recover and pulled out her computer for a quick scan. Blinking at the results, she said, "Looks like you might be able to fly too, Usagi. Those wings are made of pure lunar energy." "Really?" Usagi asked excitedly. However, Kakashi found that he should actually be worried when the silver orb in Naruto's hands began to contract, the glow growing stronger the smaller the orb became. Having a feeling about what was about to happen, Kakashi watched with some anxiety as Naruto took the brilliantly glowing orb in his right hand, then finished the throw and launched the now orange ball as far away from him as possible, on an upward trajectory and towards the river as he shouted, "Moon Bomb!" The reason for their need for height to aid their launch distance soon became quite clear. There was a brief pulse of light from the riverbed before an explosion comparable to 40 pounds of C4 went off, spewing water and earth skyward. When everyone could finally see the point of detonation, there was a rather impressive crater that the river was rapidly filling to form a pool before continuing on its original course. "Holy smokes!" Makoto said with wide eyes. "You can say that again," Minako said, her and the others also wide-eyed. "Holy smokes!" Usagi obliged. Discarding his wings, Naruto dropped the 75 feet to the ground and landed in a superhero landing before turning to Kakashi and casually said, "Impressive enough for you, sensei?" "Yeah, I think it was Naruto," Kakashi said quickly adopting his unflappable stance. "Naruto, I don't think I need to tell you not to use that in densely populated areas, except in extreme emergencies," Minato said firmly. "Of course, sensei," Naruto said, nodding before taking a wobbly step. "Naruto!" Usagi and Ami said in alarm as they quickly jumped up and ran towards the boy to check on him. Naruto had one hand on his head but quickly used it to greet the two and said, "I'm fine, I'm still getting used to forming and then condensing so much lunar energy into such a small package. Your teacher told you not to overdo it, kid." Usagi snorted. Honestly, what was with her descendant constantly outdoing her attacks? "Indeed I did. Turn off and get some rest, Naruto, I think I've seen enough," Minato said as he and Kushina jumped off the logs. Naruto nodded, and there was another brief flash of silver before he slipped back into his regular clothes. He stumbled again slightly, but quickly regained his balance. Seeing this, Usagi sighed and lifted the young shinobi over her shoulders and onto her back, earning a surprised squawk from Naruto before he said, "Usagi, put me down." "I'm fine." Usagi turned her head so her descendant could see her stuck-out tongue as she said, "Naya!" Smiling as Ami giggled, she stood up properly and gave Naruto a quick move to get him into a better position before looking at Minato, who definitely had an amused look in his eyes, and asked, "What now, sir?" Time skip, 1 week later future time, present Tokyo, 1 hour after Scouts/Shinobi attack. The storm that had been rumbling when Kushina and Anbu Team 5 arrived had reached the park by the time Naruto decided to head back. As the pink lightning that denoted travel with his time key faded, the sky lit up with white light and there was a fairly quick crack of thunder. Usagi flinched in surprise at the loud sound, but managed to keep from screaming. Looking up at the sky, Naruto said, "Sorry, Usagi, I forgot about this storm." "It's okay, Naruto, at least it's not raining," Usagi said, giving the young Lunar Zero a shaky smile. "You do realize you're probably fooled, right?" Ray asked with a raised eyebrow, earning a groan from the bunny. "Then I guess we should all get home before it starts," Makoto said with a smile. Ami nodded and said, "In fact, we really shouldn't stay out in this weather any longer than necessary. See you tomorrow, girls. Take care, Naruto," Minako said, waving before running off. The other girls also said goodbye before leaving alone Naruto and Usagi. Another flash of lightning and a crack of thunder sent the two running quickly toward the Tsukino residence. As they ran, Naruto looked at his expectant mother and said, "So what do you think of Konoha?" Usagi smiled and said, "It was nice, but you meet some guys a week. How are some of your classmates different?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow, earning a laugh and a smile from the girl before she increased her speed. She hated lightning, after all. Chapter 19. The Dark Dream of the Twins. Story start. Dreamscape shared. About a week after Rubius's capture, a blast of silver energy tore through the desolate landscape, destroying decrepit pillars left and right. At its point of origin, Naruto gasped as he held his right hand up and said, "Man, these guys don't give up." An equally exhausted Chibiusa clung to her brother's shirt as she looked around wearily before looking back, and her eyes widened in fear and yelled, "Naruto, behind us!" Naruto turned around and saw the 24 Grim Reaper-like enemies snapping to himself as he transformed into his true form and lashed out with an overwhelming lunar wave that blasted into the group and sent them hurtling before shattering into miasmas of darkness before they hit the ground. Instantly falling out of true form after his attack, Naruto fell to his knees panting and said, "We need to find a way out of here. But how? This wasteland goes on forever," Chibiusa said, tears once again escaping her eyes. Naruto frowned before looking at a spot in the sky where black light was counterintuitively glowing and said, "If there wasn't that damn barrier over that black crystal, we could probably get out without any problem." After one of the 6 beams of dark energy that said barrier produced from the ground, it clicked again and said, "The problem is that the barrier generators are constantly moving, and every time I try to form my wings they knock me back down. This is all my fault. If I could use my lunar abilities as well as you, we wouldn't be having so much trouble," Chibiusa said dejectedly. "Hey, once I showed you how you blasted lunar waves left and right for 10 whole hours, it's nothing to sneeze at," Naruto said, trying to reassure her. "But I used up all my energy, and it hasn't come back in days, so I can barely walk while you're still going strong," Chibiusa said with a dejected nod. "Not so hard," Naruto said with a tired smile even as he struggled to his feet, panting. He wasn't sure how long he could keep this up, but he had to hold on as long as he could. The more he did, the more time his allies had to try and find them. Once again stealing his nerves, Naruto placed his sister's arm around his shoulders and said, "Come on, we need to keep moving." Scene change. In the future, Prince Demand's throne room. A silver-haired man with the Dark Moon clan symbol on his forehead sat on his throne as a pillar of dark energy briefly erupted behind him. In front of him stood a blue-haired man and a green-haired woman. These were Demon, Saphir, and Esmeralda, respectively. Demon sighed before raising his wine glass filled with drinks and said, "I'm tired of waiting for these children, but by attacking them in their dreams, maybe this time we'll capture them. Oh, what a pain. I hope Grimman fails, so I have a chance to impress him," Esmeralda thought to herself. "You've been very quiet, Saphir. What are you thinking?" Demon asked. "I'm thinking we're wasting our time. I don't understand why these two children are so important to Grand Prince Demon, Saphir said strongly. Demon looked to the side and said, Bring them, we get the silver crystal. But your highness, Saphir began before Esmeralda interrupted him as she said, Relax, Saphir, if Grim Man fails, I'll pick up where Rubius left off. You know, when you think about it, Rubius had no idea. She burst into an annoyed laugh at the end of her statement, the laughter that was cut off by Demon when she said, Esmeralda, stop, this is no laughing matter. Esmeralda blushed behind her unfurled fan and said, Oh, forgive me, your highness. Choosing to ignore her, Saphir turned to Demon and said, Your highness, I don't understand why you're so obsessed with obtaining that stupid silver crystal. Sure, its power is formidable, but it's nothing compared to the dark crystal. The future is ours, forget about getting tangled up in the past. Demon had his eyes closed before he opened them and said, Wiseman. The hidden specter vanished and said, Saphir is wrong. Never underestimate the power of the silver crystal. It must be destroyed if you wish to secure your dominion here and now. While Saphir looked a little confused, Demon stood up from her throne and walked around it to look at a new pillar of growing dark energy and said, Wise advise Wiseman. As soon as the Grim Man captures those two children, the crystal will be mine. Scene change, Tsukino home. The Sailor Scouts surrounded two futons on which Naruto and Chibiusa slept. But this sleep was not peaceful. The two had been unconscious for 3 full days, their two eyes rapidly moving beneath their eyelids, and Usagi had felt Naruto's lunar energy steadily depleting as it continuously pulsed as if he were in the midst of combat. Chibiusa's had been the same, but now it was barely present, feeling more like the normal energy levels of a child than a lunar descendant. However, at this moment, Usagi's eyes were glazed over with her crescent moon mark showing as the rest of the Sailor Scouts exchanged nervous glances. She suddenly blinked out of her momentary trance and her mark vanished as she said, I think I know how to help you, do you think? Minako asked skeptically. Usagi rubbed the back of her head and said, Well, without being able to get a diagnostic skin like Naruto did for me, Leon had to guess at some of what's going on. Leon? Ami asked, her head tilted. The AI at the registry is called LRAI or Lunar Registry Artificial Intelligence Assistant, but he said that's what most of the people who need his help call him. Usagi said distractedly before shaking her head and saying, Anyway, he put me in touch with one of my ancestors, a dream expert named Talia, and she taught me how to enter another person's dreams to help them overcome a nightmare when they can't wake up due to natural causes or enemy actions. I think it's the best chance we have, so what are we waiting for? Let's go in and help them, Makoto said with her fist raised. The other scouts nodded and Usagi soon lined them up at the head of the two futons. The Sailor Scouts each had a hand on each other's shoulder, and the chain led to Usagi, who in turn had a hand on each of the children's foreheads. Usagi's eyes fluttered as she began to concentrate, and her moon mark reappeared as silver energy began to flow heavily out of her and up the girls' arms towards their heads. When they were all linked, Usagi took a moment to make sure the connection wouldn't break before the energy flowed down her arms and touched the heads of her future children. There was a brief pause before all the Sailor Scouts' perceptions suddenly changed. Scene change, dreamscape. The girls suddenly found themselves in a desert filled with ruined pillars. As an ominous wind blew over them, they all shivered, and Ami said, What a terrible place! And Naruto and Chibiusa have been here for 3 days? Then we'd better find them quickly so we can get them out of here, Makoto said with a frown. Not 2 seconds after she said that, an explosion erupted as a burst of silver energy erupted a mile away to her right, followed by a rapid discharge of silver flashes. Somehow I don't think that'll be a problem, Ray said before the 5 girls broke into a run as they rushed to the battlefield. When they got there 7 minutes later, they stopped as they saw Naruto jump over 2 Grim Reaper-like figures, the moon blades in their hands decapitating them. Naruto collapsed to the ground panting as they separated into the black clouds of darkness. He kicked them again, and they rushed forward and everyone shouted, Naruto! Apparently, that was the wrong thing to do, as Naruto was suddenly on his feet, his lips parted in a determined snarl and his blades ready to slice through these new enemies. The girls stopped with looks of fear on their faces. It was probably the only thing keeping them from being filleted like that night's fish dinner. Seeing the fear, Naruto blinked tiredly once before lowering his blades and said, Either the enemy decided to try a new trick, or I'm really seeing a bunch of teenage girls before me. It's not a trick, Naruto, we're really here. Usagi said as she started walking forward with a relieved smile. That smile froze as Naruto stiffened and raised his right sword threateningly, and said coldly, "How do you know that name, Naruto? Don't you remember me?" Usagi asked confused. "The only person I remember who looks like you is my mother, and she's a few decades older than you. If you're trying to get me to let my guard down by imitating her, I suggest you drop the act," Naruto said coldly, his moon sword beginning to glow a little brighter. Minako sighed and said, "Guess who trapped the kids here and messed with their memories? Maybe this will help smooth things over." Taking out her transformation quill, she intoned, "Venus Star Power!" There was a flash of orange light, and Sailor Venus stood in Minako's place. Naruto's jaw dropped, and he too dropped his swords, which vanished before hitting the ground. He then let out a relieved smile as he said, "Looks like someone finally broke through, even if I don't recognize you, alright." He suddenly collapsed as he finally allowed the exhaustion that had been building up for the past 3 days to overcome him. "Naruto!" Usagi yelled, running forward, a scream that was mimicked as Chibiusa rushed out from under the dubious cover of a pillar buried in the ground at an angle. The two lunars reached Naruto at roughly the same time, and Chibiusa worriedly shook her brother, trying to wake him up, even as she eyed the girls warily. Ami was there a moment later, having pulled out the Mercury computer and scanning the young prince. A moment later, she sighed in relief and said, "He's exhausted." All the girls breathed a sigh of relief at that before Ami looked at Chibiusa and said, "And you, Chibiusa? Are you okay?" The pinkette bit her lip before nodding and saying, "I'm fine." Giving everyone another uncertain look, she said, "Are you all Sailor Scouts?" Ami smiled and said, "Why don't we show you?" She took out her transformation pen, an action copied by Makoto and Rei, as Usagi clenched her moon pendant, and moments later the Sailor Scouts had replaced their civilian identities. The sight of the outfits filled Chibiusa with relief, and she slumped wearily next to her brother with a sigh, her eyes closing as well. She and her brother were in the presence of Sailor Scouts. The danger, though not over, was now severely diminished. A look shared between Moon and Mercury had them picking up Naruto and Chibiusa respectively, and as they stood up, Jupiter said, "Let's get out of here and find something better before more sides show up." The girls all nodded and began searching for a more defensible area. Time jump, an indeterminable time later. The scouts had managed to find an area that had more pillars than sand. It wasn't ideal, but it gave them a lot more cover than they'd had before. Both Naruto and Chibiusa hadn't responded for a while, and the girls were starting to get even more worried. Finally, however, their wait ended when Naruto let out an exhausted groan and wearily opened his eyes. He barely had time to glance at them wearily before Moon was at his side, gently helping him sit up as she said, "Easy, kid, looks like you've been through the ringer. I feel like it." Naruto muttered tiredly, unconsciously curling into Moon's torso as he sensed the energy of a fellow lunar being. Usagi's cheeks flushed slightly at the action, but she shook it off as she said, "Well, don't worry, we're here now so you don't have to fight anymore." "That's good to hear. I don't think I have much longer anyway," Naruto muttered tiredly. There was a flare of heat and light as Mars cooked one of the monsters that had managed to find them, attracting the attention of Naruto and Usagi. Mercury looked up from her computer and watched the sadly semi-regular occurrence before looking back at it. A minute later, she nodded and closed it with a click as she said, "Alright, I think I know how to get out of here." With all the scouts and Naruto's attention turned to her, she pointed skyward at the rather large dark crystal hanging above them and said, "I've scanned the barrier around that crystal and found that if we keep a continuous barrage of energy against it, then the energy beams providing it with power will have to remain stationary in order to maintain it. If we can continue the attack long enough, then we can begin taking out the anchor points one by one until the barrier is drained of power. At that point, it should be fairly simple to destroy the crystal itself. I guess we'll take turns attacking him then," Jupiter said, tilting his head. Mercury nodded and said, "I suggest you, Venus, and Mars attack the shield while Moon and I go after the anchors." "What do you need me to do?" Naruto asked tiredly as he shakily began to stand up. He was summarily thrown down into the sand by Luna as she gave him a stern look and said, "You stay here and Mr. Rest, you've done more than enough." Naruto opened his mouth to argue only to smother the glare Moon gave him, nodding her head and saying demurely, "Yes, ma'am." Moon nodded once in satisfaction before standing up and removing her skirt as she said, "Well, we better get started then." This place gives me the creeps and I want to get out of here. The other scouts nodded, and Venus began attacking the barrier with her beam attack. Mercury and Moon jumped to the top of the pillars and searched for the nearest anchor point before taking off, using the pillars as jump points for speed. When they reached said anchor point, they discovered the energy was coming from another of the local enemies. Only this thing was 3 times bigger and looked 3 times meaner. Its scythe had a wicked serrated edge instead of the smooth edge the others had. Moon gulped from where they were looking around a pillar and said, "Do we have to take out 6 of those things to get out of here?" Mercury hummed before smiling at Moon and saying, "I guess it's a good thing I came with you. After all, I doubt even that thing could do anything if it was completely frozen." Moon smirked as he took out his scepter and said, "Now you're talking. You set them up, and I'll take them down." Mercury nodded and waited for the enemy to turn their back while periodically scanning the area before leaping onto the pillar and shouting, "Shine Aqua Illusion!" The creature spun around only to receive a blast of cryogenic energy to the face and instantly freeze. The next instant, Sailor Moon's attack slammed into it, shattering the ice and the monster inside into so many moondust-flavored ice chunks. As Mercury rejoined Moon, they exchanged high fives before going after their next target. Less than an hour later, the 2 scouts returned to the others, staring up at the black crystal that now loomed unprotected above them. Jupiter and Mars cracked their knuckles as they prepared to blast it into atoms when Naruto suddenly leaped to the top of a pillar in his true form. The girls spared a moment to stare at where he had been less than a moment before, an empty spot that had black lines trailing off it, and flickered 3 times before their attention was brought back to Naruto as a silver light began to glow. Naruto growled as he said in his standard 2-toned voice, "I've had enough of this place, it's time to go." The next instant a bow of silver energy formed in his hands and he pulled it back, causing an arrow of the same energy to form, making all of the scouts' jaws drop as they all simultaneously thought, "So many attacks does he have?" Well, all except for Moon, who instead thought, "I definitely need to talk to Leon about getting more teachers when this is over." Not caring about the blow he had made to the scouts, Naruto calmly intoned Artemis' judgment, then released the arrow, which shot upwards at the speed of light, and was completely destroyed by the black crystal as it exploded on impact. The next instant the world ran out. Change of scene, real world. As one, the Sailor Scouts' eyes shot open, and they looked around before they all looked down at the sound of a groan. When Chibiusa's eyes opened, they all smiled, only for those smiles to freeze when the Pinkette's eyes suddenly opened and she asked, "Usagi, why do you have a moon crest on your forehead?" Chapter 20. Late Realization. Previously on the Time-Traveling Prince. As one, the Sailor Scouts' eyes shot open, and they looked around before they all looked down at the sound of a groan. When Chibiusa's eyes opened, they all smiled, only for those smiles to freeze when the Pinkette's eyes suddenly opened and she asked, "Usagi, why do you have a moon crest on your forehead?" Now, before Usagi could say anything, Naruto let out a sleepy grunt before tiredly asking, "Have you really not figured it out yet?" All the girls looked over to see Naruto's eyes barely open, tiredly looking at his sister before he yawned and got out of the bed he had been lying in for the past 3 days. Giving a heave, Naruto left the room with a fist rubbing one of his eyes as he muttered, "I'm having some coffee." Her comment had everyone else in the room giving a collective blink of their eyes before Minako glanced at Ami and asked, Is it a good idea for a boy his age to actually have coffee?" Ami shrugged and said, "There's nothing in it that can harm the body, and after what the twins went through, it seems like a good idea for him to get a little extra caffeine into his system." "Still, I didn't think Naruto drank coffee," Rei said in confusion. "I've certainly never seen him drink it before," Usagi said, puzzled. "Who cares if Naruto drinks coffee or not? What did he mean by 'I haven't figured it out yet'?" Chibiusa asked, frustrated. The chibi had her arms crossed and an angry pout on her face. Honestly, if the situation wasn't so dire, the older girls would be cooing at the cute sight she made. Still, she wanted an answer, and she was going to get it even if she had to resort to pulling Usagi's hair. Thankfully for those long ponytails, Usagi was going to answer her, albeit reluctantly. Sighing with her eyes closed as she rubbed the back of her head, Usagi let out a small moan before nodding. Opening her eyes, her crescent mark popped back into existence, and she stared directly into Chibiusa's eyes, the intensity of the gaze in those blue eyes causing Chibiusa to grow slightly uncertain. The Pinkette dropped her arms and her eyes widened slightly as Usagi said, "Chibiusa, what you're about to hear isn't happening to us or Naruto. Not even Mom and Dad know about this, and Shingo definitely doesn't. Am I clear? Chibiusa gulped and said. Yes, ma'am. Who knew the usually dim-witted Usagi could be so terrifying? Usagi held her gaze on her, unknown to her, future daughter for another long moment before nodding once. She then reached for her brooch, detached it, and pressed the unlocking mechanism. Chibiusa barely had time to gasp at the sight of the silver crystal contained within before there was a flash of silver light, and where Usagi Tsukino had once sat, Sailor Moon now occupied the space directly in front of Chibiusa. Said Pinkette's mouth dropped, and she shakily pointed her finger at Moon and said, You! Multiple flashes of light in blue, red, orange, and green made her turn her astonished gaze to see the other Sailor Scouts occupying the spots where the other girls had been. Jupiter and Venus had smiles on their faces and amusement in their eyes, while Mars gave her a regal nod and Mercury smiled kindly at her. After a full minute of wordless babbling from the younger girl, Chibiusa suddenly turned around and pointed accusingly at a Naruto who was leaning against the door frame and hissed. You knew who that was this whole time? Naruto blew the steam off the coffee cup in his right hand and took a sip before calmly saying, I did it. Well, why didn't you tell me? Her sister asked, almost shouting the question. Naruto raised an eyebrow and said, Operational security. The raised eyebrows combined with his tone of voice made it sound like he thought it should have been obvious to his sister. The fact that he took another sip of his coffee right after only exacerbated that image. Do what? Chibiusa asked in surprise, her feet wide open at that answer. Sighing, Naruto said, Chibiusa, there's a saying in this time period, a secret untold is a secret untold. The fewer people who know the scouts' identities, the less chance there is that the information can spread. Chibiusa got angry again as she said, Do you think I would have told anyone who the Sailor Scouts were? Probably not willingly, but if someone were to manage to get past me and the Sailor Scouts and capture him, then they would surely try to make their senses on you. Naruto said calmly, his shinobi training making a chilling appearance with how calmly he said that, and more importantly, what he hadn't said but implied would happen if he ever failed in his mission to protect her. Harsh, but true, I'm afraid. Jupiter said with a frown, causing Chibiusa to turn her now pale face towards said scout. We don't like it, but secrecy keeps those we care about safe. Mercury said, a frown forming on his own face. That's why you can't say a word about this to anyone, not even in your dreams. Moon said sternly, especially not your dreams, given what you two just went through. Mars added, as the Sailor Scouts returned to their civilian forms. Chibiusa looked towards Naruto with a frown and said, I think I can understand that, but why did you tell Naruto then? Naruto actually snorted as he said, It wasn't, I felt that by this period's standards, the girls' massive amount of elements in their chakra systems, and made a logical conclusion from that. More specifically, he identified Rei as Mars the moment he first saw her, and inferred that the other boarders were her friends since the number of people matched both groups. Uniforms imbued with secret magic were no match when it came to logic and deductive reasoning, especially when it was someone trained as a shinobi wearing them. Chibiusa pouted and said, Have I ever told you that your super ninja skills are cheating? Naruto smiled and said, Once or twice. Chibiusa's pout and Naruto's grin were enough to make the girls laugh at the two, and the topic soon changed to much more light-hearted fare. Time skip. The next day, leaving the Tsukino household, Usagi walked down the street with the twins on her left, Luna on her left shoulder. Chibiusa bounced her ever-present Luna P while Naruto had his hands around the straps of his equally ever-present backpack. Smiling at the two of them from her perch, Luna took the opportunity to be away from the rest of the Tsukino family to say, Oh, it's so good to see you two again. We were really worried sick about you two. Chibiusa smiled at the cat and said, Yeah, it's great to be back. Naruto hummed and looked about to say something before frowning and saying, Oh great, he's here. Naruto? Usagi asked before Mamoru came out of an alley and Chibiusa's eyes lit up as she happily shouted, Mamoru! As Chibiusa happily ran up to jump into his arms, Mamoru smiled at her and said, Chibiusa! Minako told me you and Naruto are feeling better, I'm glad. Chibiusa nodded happily before saying, Hey Mamoru, do you think you could take us to the mall in celebration? I want to get some paper, glue, scissors, and yes, some new colored pencils. Whoa, slow down Chibiusa, I didn't know Christmas was already here. Mamoru said with a laugh in his voice. His amusement turned to a swift and quick death when he heard Naruto scoff. Wincing, he looked down at the ground and seeing Naruto giving him the dirty look, the older man laughed nervously and said, Hey Naruto, how are you? I'm doing well, something we couldn't possibly share in common, any sooner, Mamoru. Were my words during our last meeting not clear enough? Naruto asked dangerously, his right hand taking on a discreet silver glow as he held it. Keeping Chibiusa up with one arm, Mamoru raised his other hand in surrender and said, Wow, easy, I just wanted to try and fix some bridges. You broke more than just bridges with that trick you pulled, Shiba. Naruto said, his eyes narrowed. Naruto? Usagi asked uncertainly, not liking how her future offspring looked at her ex. Hopefully soon he would be her current boyfriend again. If she didn't know any better, she would have said that Naruto was planning to use that lunar energy in his hand, even with her sister still being held back by the college student. Mamoru grimaced again and said, Look, I know I was being stupid, but I can't fix what I've done wrong if I don't at least try. Naruto kept his stern gaze on Mamoru, remaining silent for 10 seconds before saying, You have one chance, Chiba. If you screw this up, you'll get your medical degree from a laptop in the ICU, am I clear? Usagi, Luna, and Chibiusa felt chills at the promise Naruto's words held, while Mamoru also shuddered as a bead of sweat formed on the back of his neck at the small amount of killing intent Naruto was letting go while fully concentrating on him. Swallowing once, he nodded and said, Sure. Naruto narrowed his eyes a little more before giving one last snort and releasing his killing intent and allowing his lunar energy to fade away. Walking away from Mamoru, he began walking down the street again, clearly saying that this conversation was over, earning a small sigh of relief from Mamoru, who looked down and gave Chibiusa a shaky smile as he said, You know, Chibiusa, your brother can be quite terrifying when he wants to be. Chibiusa gave a shaky smile and said, Yeah, he's good at that. I'm glad he's on our side, Usagi said, watching her blonde companion walk down the street, and Luna let out a hum of agreement as she nodded her head. Scene change. In the future Black Moon Clan main base. Demon was sitting on his throne with his eyes closed when he heard someone say, Pardon, Your Highness. Opening his eyes, he saw Esmeralda standing before him. At his murmur of recognition, she held her fan in front of his face and said, Our preparations are complete. Everything is in order for our journey back to the 20th century. Demon frowned and said, Listen to me, Esmeralda, for your own good, you must be very careful not to repeat Rubius's mistakes. Esmeralda let out one of her annoying laughs and said, Please, you don't have to worry about me. I won't make mistakes like that Rubius doll. Yes, prove it, Saphir said as he suddenly became visible right next to her. Oh, Saphir. Esmeralda hissed in disgust. Saphir continued as if she wasn't speaking as he continued. Rubius's biggest mistake was underestimating the Sailor Scouts and Prince Naruto. They are worthy adversaries, but we can eliminate them. If Rubius hadn't crashed, burned, and changed the crystal points in the 20th century to dark power, then the Sailor Scouts of this century and their hateful power would have greatly diminished, along with Prince Naruto. Now they will continue to remain strong until our dark power is secured. I'm no fool when it comes to Saphir's abilities, and I have a foolproof scheme that will fix them for good. Even if you do, we only need to send enough dark power back to the 20th century to contaminate the entire planet Earth, Esmeralda said confidently, a confidence that Demon did not share, as shown when he said, Get a hint, Esmeralda, it's not like we can just go in and leave enough dark power to contaminate such a massive planet. Unless the mighty gate of darkness can be opened, Esmeralda smiled and said, Well, you might be quite surprised, Your Highness. You see, the world of the 20th century is quite primitive. In that world, there are numerous vulnerable points containing negative power. These points could be anywhere in a given city, and toward these undefended points, we will drive wedges of dark crystal power. Then, the power of our dark world will follow the wedges inside. Once we secure those unguarded points, and the dark gate opens, we will send out the mighty magnificent dark crystal, and color the entire planet Earth our beautiful shade of darkness. I have instructed Saphir to construct wedges containing the power of the dark crystal, and as soon as he gives me one, we can begin. Saphir gave a disgruntled grunt before gesturing, and a crystal in Esmeralda's likeness floated down and into his hand. As Esmeralda smiled at the wedge, Saphir decided to speak up as he said, Hold on to your boots, Esmeralda. I've made the wedges of dark power, but don't waste them. I can make more if needed, but if you fail, don't come crying to me like Rubius did after each of his lame attempts. Esmeralda smiled and said, Oh, of course not. The faster I can get this job done, the faster I can get back to Prince Hunkster. As she closed her eyes with a blush, Demon took that moment to look away with a roll of his eyes before quickly turning back to her and saying, "Very well, Esmeralda, I approve of your plan. Go and do your best to succeed, and go quickly." Esmeralda bowed and said, "Thank you for your trust. I'll go and put my plan to work so quickly that you'll want to give me a personal, positive reward very soon." Esmeralda gave another annoying laugh before fading away, and Demon thought to himself, "Is it wrong for me to expect the moon brat to carve that nuisance into a turkey once he's finished his plan?" After a moment, he thought, "No, once her plan succeeds, it will be useless. Let the brat take out his frustration at not being able to stop her in time." Scene change, 20th century, the mall. After visiting a craft shop for Chibiusa, the group came across a dessert place that had just opened and was therefore having a first gift is free event when Naruto and Usagi stiffened. Looking up at her, Naruto said, "You feel it too, right?" Usagi, having undergone more training since the Megamarket incident, nodded and said, "Yeah, I feel some serious Niga vibes coming from that place." The excitement the girl had been displaying upon approaching a free snack was gone, leaving only the determination of a sailor scout who knew the enemy was near. Chibiusa frowned at the two before attempting to sense what the other two lunars were feeling. Thanks to Naruto's hasty training in their shared dream, her lunar abilities allowed her rudimentary detection skills, and she gasped as she sensed the darkness of the place and shuddered as she said, "I don't want to go in anymore, and you're not until we take care of this," Usagi said firmly even as Naruto led the group to a service alley between retail buildings. Once there, a shadow clone appeared right next to Chibiusa as he said, "We're going to have to take out the civilians before we start fighting. Any ideas?" Usagi grimaced and said, "Outside of starting a fire?" "I have nothing." A glance at Mamoru showed that he had nothing either, and Naruto shook himself before closing his eyes and thought. A moment later, they opened again, and he said, "I have something, but you're not going to like it." Turning to his sister, he said, "Sis, stay here with my clone." Looking at Mamoru, he frowned and said, "Can I trust you to at least keep her out of this?" Mamoru nodded quickly, both because it would keep Chibiusa safe, and because Naruto was back in full shinobi mode and frankly preferred to be away from the boy when he got down to business. That pint-sized warrior could be downright brutal in a fight. Once he was sure that his clone and Mamoru would keep Chibiusa safe, Naruto led the way to the tent, Usagi following after placing Luna on the ground. As the two blondes approached, Usagi looked down and said, "What are you planning, scare gunman?" was his short reply, and Usagi let out a worried face at that, though she trusted Naruto enough not to question it. As they entered the shop, Naruto quickly located where the bathrooms were. A cursory glance around the room made him smile and say, "Hey, look Usagi, the other girls are already here. I can't believe they didn't invite us to join them, huh?" Usagi asked, looking at Naruto, who winked at her and then pointed to their table. When she saw where he was pointing, there was a quick flash of relief that the backup was already there before she put on a believable look of anger and said, "Yeah, you're right. Come on, I'll give them a piece of my mind." The two blondes quickly approached the group. When Usagi started complaining to the girls, Naruto quickly used the underside of the table to write the words "enemies present" on a napkin and place it in Rei's lap. Rei looked down at the object in her lap and her eyes widened slightly before she returned to acting normal, even as she passed the note around to the other scouts. A minute later, Usagi snorted and said, "Whatever, if you guys want to keep this wonderful event to yourselves, we'll just have to sit somewhere else. Can we use the bathroom first, cousin?" Naruto asked, and at Usagi's hum of recognition, the two powers moved away from the table. The other girls quickly got up and continued the act of trying to reason with their friend. The girls were soon in the bathroom, where, once they were sure no one else was there, they quickly transformed and waited. Meanwhile, Naruto took a minute to prepare himself for what he was about to do. While he was sure his teachers would understand, his mother would not approve. Opening his eyes with a sigh, Naruto made 3 quick hand signs and used the transformation jutsu to make himself resemble one of Minato-sensei's jounin, a Genma Shirani. Running the needle through his mouth, Naruto checked the mirror to make sure he had transformed into a pair of jeans and a hoodie with the hood up instead of the man's jounin attire. Once he was sure he got that detail right, he raised the gun in his hand before turning around and leaving the room. He took only a second to make sure the invader was in the back area before firing his gun, an AK-47 set to only fire at the ceiling, his genjutsu going off with a loud bang that caught everyone's attention. Looking at them all, he yelled, "Everyone out! Now!" The customers didn't need to be told twice, and within seconds they were all running screaming for the door. As soon as the last one left, Naruto rushed over and activated the shutter door to lock the place down. A lunar summon to each of the security cameras disguised as firing his gun at them later. Naruto dropped his transformation and said, "Alright girls, you may leave now." When the scouts came out of the bathroom, Mars frowned and said, "Was that really necessary? So you're saying you want to fight the invader with civilians around?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow, making Mars snort with her arms crossed, but she didn't say anything. "Where's the invader?" Mercury asked as he pressed his left earring and his visor seemed to begin scanning the area. Naruto pointed towards the back even as Esmeralda and the enemy of the day started to appear at the cashier, and said the enemy yelled, "Right here!" Naruto felt an eye twitch at the sight of the enemy servant. She had frosting nozzles for her brow, nothing else on top to hide her dark skin, purple spiky hair, and a yellow miniskirt that had a blue and white striped bow in the back that matched her leggings. Meanwhile, Esmeralda let out an annoyed laugh and said, Well, what do we have here? 5 sailor scouts and a moon brat. Marzipan droid, take them out." "Yes, ma'am," Marzipan said eagerly before a pair of frosted funnel guns appeared above her hands and shot streams of white frosting at the scouts. Said girls scrambled to avoid them, Jupiter and Mars pushing the nearest table to hide behind, while Luna, Mercury, and Venus quickly jumped off. Jupiter and Mars were shocked when the table they had flipped overturned into a giant cake. Seeing this, Jupiter called out to the others, "Don't let those things hit you, gee, you think?" Venus asked as she jumped onto a table, avoiding another current that turned her into a giant dessert as well. "I've got it!" Naruto shouted as he leaped onto another table and unleashed the glowing bow and arrow in his hands. His Artemis judgment went live, landing the enemy droid right between its eyes, the concentrated energy sinking halfway down its shaft. The droid screamed like the damned for a few seconds before turning to stone and disintegrating. Esmeralda gasped at the sight of her droid being pulled out so quickly before squealing in fear as Moon launched a brilliantly glowing lunar wave at her. Esmeralda managed to jump out of the way of the wave, but her jump left her wide open and Naruto shot a second arrow at her. Esmeralda somehow spun in the air in an attempt to escape, only for Naruto's arrow to hit her in the right knee. Esmeralda screamed in pain as she landed in a crash. Shakily scrambled to her feet and growled, "Brat! I'll get you for that!" But despite his words, he quickly faded away, fleeing instead of trying to defend himself. Discarding the bow from his hands, Naruto sighed and said, "Does anyone else think this fight was pathetically short?" "Yeah, no kidding, even the sisters fought harder than her," Jupiter said as she and Mars straightened their backs to the regular tables. "Hey, I'm not complaining. If it's going to be this easy from now on, then we don't have much to worry about," Venus said with a smile. Mercury opened his mouth to say something only to close it when the sound of several running feet sounded outside the closed entrance of the store, and a voice yelled, "Police! Open the door and come out with your hands above your head, and that's our cue to get out of here," Naruto said even as he ran through the tables to the back. "You'll get no arguments from me." Moon agreed as she and the other scouts quickly followed the young shinobi, going through the large exhaust vent that helped cool the kitchen's large ovens instead of out the back door where the police were likely. The girls abandoned their transformations as soon as they left and discreetly met up with Mamoru, Chibiusa, and Luna before leaving the area. There had been enough excitement for one day after all. Chapter 21. Sailor Moon and Naruto's Overrating. T English, words, 94K+, faves 339, follows 334, published November 20th, 2010, updated December 20th, 2019, 116. Chapter 22, Biowar. 22, Biowarfare. Quick author's notes. Episode 70. Promise is kept. Is skipped primarily because Mamoru has already reunited with Usagi. Isn't it great when the threat of violence from a little kid makes things go faster? Story start. Rooftop construction shop, midnight. The enemy droid gave one last scream of pain as Sailor Moon's moonbeam burned through its non-existent heart. As the enemy turned into moon dust, she punched him before turning around and smiling at her future offspring as she said, "Did you see Naruto? I beat him alone. Well done, cousin." Naruto said with a smile as he jumped down from the railing he'd been sitting on. Walking over, he slapped the offered palm and said, "We'll make you a moon clapper yet, young man," Sailor Moon said with a smile before dropping her transformation. Frowning at the pile of dust, she said, "But actually, using items meant to spread love to spread dark energy was just plain rude of you. Yeah, I have a feeling those invaders skipped their fashion lessons," Naruto said with a smile, as the two entered the building and headed down the stairs. Fortunately, this building had several shops that were open 24 hours a day, so they didn't have to take the hard way down. As the door closed, Esmeralda vanished into the next building with a look of rage on her face. She clenched her fists so tightly they shook, raised one in front of her face, and said, "Oh, that lunar brat! When I get my hands on her, I'll make her regret the day she was born." Fading away, she returned to her base to try to come up with another plan. Time jump, 2 days later. Aku! Usagi sneezed so hard that her bed sheets temporarily flew off her bed before sitting back up. Groaning miserably as she blew her nose into a tissue, she smiled gratefully at Naruto, who had handed it to her, and said, "Thanks, Naruto. No problem, Usagi," Naruto said, putting the tissue box back on the table and instead picking up the bowl of soup he'd swapped for said tissue box when he noticed the girl was about to sneeze. Humming, he said, "It's not steaming anymore. I should probably heat this up again." Naruto's eyes grew slightly distant as he concentrated before the hand holding the bottom of the bowl glowed a red light as he used a small bit of fire chakra to heat the bowl. A minute later, steam was once again rising from the liquid and he nodded as he spooned it around, then offered the spoon to Usagi. Said blonde obediently accepted the spoonful and gulped with a sigh as she said, "Ah, hot soup is much better than lukewarm." Smiling at him again, she said, "You're a lifesaver, Naruto. Him." A growl came from her wall and Usagi turned her gaze to it before laughing as she said, "I still can't believe you did that to me, Nako." Naruto looked over to where the third blonde in the room had been practically mummified and then taped to the wall next to the door, a strip of which was over his mouth, and looked down at said pint-sized blonde. Huffing, Naruto said, "Yeah, well, after what the other girls said he did while trying to help, I figured I'd better make sure he didn't get any ideas. My hero," Usagi said with a giggle, earning even more complaints from Minako. Artemis wisely decided not to say anything from where she lay in the window seat, soaking up some sun next to a fainted Luna. Everyone in the room looked towards the door as it opened and admitted Chibiusa holding a bowl and 2 teacups as she said, "Shingo and the older Tsukinos are all asleep now. Whatever you put in their soup and tea respectively was actually quite strong, Naruto." Naruto shrugged and said, "Just a herbal concoction Tsunade-sensei taught me. It helps boost a person's immunity and helps them sleep, 2 of the best things you can do for a sick person. I'm not going to suddenly burst out, am I?" Usagi asked, giving her soup a semi-cautious look. Only semi-cautious because it was so good she couldn't not finish it. Then she looked at Luna, whom Naruto had also given some to earlier, and who hadn't shown any signs of waking up since. "No, you're not as bad off as the other members of this house, so I didn't make your concoction as strong. You'll probably be asleep in 10 minutes, Naruto said, spooning some more and giving it to his expectant mother. Once she swallowed, Naruto tested the temperature of the bowl with his free hand and with a nod of approval placed the now tolerably warm bowl on Usagi's lap so she could feed. Turning to his sister, he tilted his head and said, "Speaking of other members, how are you holding up, sister?" "I still feel absolutely fine, just a little snotty," Chibiusa said, sniffling rapidly. At Naruto's pointed glare, she sighed with a roll of her eyes and put down the bowl and cups to take a handkerchief out of her pocket and blew her nose into it before depositing said handkerchief in Usagi's trash can. "I'm glad you two aren't sick. And I bet the rest of the girls appreciated you sending your clones to help clean up the mess Minako made of their places," Usagi said with a smile, bringing the bowl to her lips and draining the last bit of soup in 3 gulps. Letting out a satisfied sigh as she placed the bowl back in her lap, she said, "Ah, that hit the spot." Naruto chuckled as he took the now empty bowl and said, "Just doing what I can to help you girls." Walking over to Minako, he handed the bowl to Chibiusa, who placed it along with the other bowl and peeled the other girl away from the wall. Dragging her behind him as the pair of twins left the room, he looked over his shoulder and said, "Get some sleep because you'll feel a lot better when you wake up, K," Usagi said, lying back and tightening the sheets around her. Artemis stood up and quickly joined the children and their owner before the door closed and the four moved into the family room. Once there, Naruto pulled out a kunai and with a quick slash cut the tape around Minako, breaking out of the shell and tearing the piece of tape off her mouth. The blonde looked at the young shinobi and said, "Was that really necessary, after all you did trying to help others?" "Yes," Naruto said flatly as he turned to head into the kitchen, Chibiusa giggling to herself as she followed him to put the dishes in the sink. Minako grumbled something nasty under her breath, but stopped when Naruto called after her. "Hey Minako, seriously here, have you been feeling anything wrong lately?" What do you mean?" Minako asked, her head tilted in confusion. "This flu is quite unusual. Yesterday everyone was fine, but today most of the city has this. I don't care how fast diseases spread, that's not normal," Naruto said as he made some quick snacks for them. "Yeah, that's a little strange now that you mention it," Minako said as she walked into the kitchen with a finger to her chin. Accepting the sandwich with a nod, she bit into it and chewed. When she swallowed, she said, "So what, you think someone's behind this?" Naruto shrugged and said, "Biological warfare isn't a new concept," Minako frowned and asked, "Do you think that's Esmeralda Niga creep? Maybe, let me try something," Naruto said with a frown. There was a flash of silver as he transformed into a royal before pulling out a kitchen chair and sitting in it, closing his eyes as he expanded his senses. Seeing this, Minako frowned and took out her transformation quill. A moment later, Sailor Venus joined him at the kitchen table, her eyes closed as she tried to sense something as well. Even Chibiusa joined them, her eyes closed and forehead wrinkled as she tried to use her limited sensing abilities, once again wishing she could become a royal like her brother to boost her inherent abilities. 10 minutes later, Naruto said, "It's really faint, but there's something in the air." "Yes, like a fine mist of evil," Venus agreed. "I can't feel anything," Chibiusa said in frustration, shaking her head with her eyes wide open. Naruto opened his own eyes, turning his silver gaze on her as he said, "In that case, hold the fort while Venus and I track down the source." "Okay, but stay safe, I don't like this," Chibiusa said with a frown and her arms crossed. "Don't worry, Chibiusa. We'll be on guard," Venus said with a smile as she stood up. Gesturing to Naruto, she said, "Should we?" Naruto nodded, and the pair left the house, doing their best to find the source of the dark energy fog. An hour later they were standing in front of a hospital, and Venus frowned as she said, "The energy seems to be coming from here. Man, using a hospital as a base of operations while making people sick is really twisted. It's certainly a new load to use a healing site like this," Naruto said with a frown. At that moment, his transformation decided to break, and he slumped slightly as he muttered a tired, "Damn it, Naruto, are you okay? What happened?" Venus asked with concern that Naruto said goodbye as he said, "I'm fine, Venus, I've never turned real for this long. Probably the only reason I managed to maintain that form for so long was because I wasn't using it in combat. Just give me a moment." He activated his outfit, changing the seal, and Moon Fox made her appearance. Turning her fox mask towards Venus, he said, "I can still fight, so let's get this over with." "Well, if you're sure," Venus said a little unsurely before her expression firmed at Moon Fox's nod, and the two entered the hospital. Venus looked around the lobby, frowning at all the collapsed people for a moment before closing her eyes and trying to grasp where the source was. A moment later, she opened her eyes and said, "5th floor." Moon Fox glanced at the directory by the welcome desk and snorted as he said, "The Infectious Disease Center is one of the departments on that floor. The invaders really have a sense of irony, don't they?" Venus snorted at his joke and they headed towards the nearest elevator. Upon reaching the right floor, Moon Fox drew her sword and followed Venus as she purposefully walked down the hallway. In the center of the Infectious Diseases department, they came across a room with two women standing by a large glass pane, one a brown head wearing a nurse's outfit, the other a green head wearing fashionable clothes and carrying a fuzz-tipped fan. The green-haired woman gloated about her plan, her laughter grating Venus and Moon Fox's ears as they stood on either side of the door. The two warriors stared at each other for a moment before looking at each other. Venus signaled to Moon Fox that she would take out the crystal with her beam attack first while he went to find the nurse, who was clearly a disguised droid, before engaging the disguised Esmeralda. Moon Fox nodded and raised her left hand with 3 raised fingers that began to droop. As the last finger fell, Moon Fox disappeared in a swirl of leaves and Venus spun into the room, fingers already extended as she shouted, "Venus Crescent Beam!" Her attack slammed into the large crystal at the same time Moon Fox's wind-augmented blade sliced through the droid's head. "What?" Esmeralda gasped in alarm, taking a step back from her henchman's disintegrating corpse and, more importantly, the brat with a very dangerous sword she had landed on turned towards her. "You're done, nigga creep. Using a hospital to spread disease instead of healing is a capital offense," Venus said before raising her right hand and shouted, "Venus love chain encircle, yipe!" Esmeralda yelled as she desperately dodged the whip of metal hearts. Moon Fox lunged at her recovering form, the blade howling with its demand for blood, and Esmeralda screamed as the blade sliced into her side just below her ribs. Sinking to the ground, Esmeralda clutched her wounded side as Moon Fox drew her sword. But before Moon Fox could finish her off, she did the smart thing and teleported back to her base. Sking to himself, Moon Fox flicked the blood off his sword and said, "Just once I wish you would have the courtesy to stay long enough for me to finish the fight properly. I admit it gets annoying when they run," Venus said, though Moon Fox noticed she was frowning at the small amount of blood Esmeralda had left on the ground before leaving. Shaking her head, she turned to Moon Fox and said, "Come on, there's nothing else we can do here." Moon Fox nodded and the pair hurried to vacate the premises, noting that the people inside already seemed to be recovering even when they left. Time skip, the next day. "So, everyone's back to normal?" Minako said. "Yes," Naruto said, nodding. "So, this is a real cold," Minako said from her place in her bed. Artemis curled up in it and slept off her misery. "I'm afraid so," Naruto said from where he sat on the ground with a mortar and pestle grinding herbs. "Well, at least you're the one looking out for me and not Usagi," Minako said, trying to look on the bright side even as she gave a big snort. "That's what I suppose," Naruto said with a smile, emptying the contents of the mortar into a steaming bowl and stirring it before standing up and placing it on Minako's nightstand. Pouting, Minako brought the spoon to her mouth and blew as she said, "It's not fair that you're still perfectly healthy." As Minako brought the spoon to her mouth, Naruto smiled and said, "The perks of being marked by a tailed beast, so unfair." Minako muttered around her spoon, making Naruto laugh. Chapter 22. Mercury Extracurricular Class. Beginning of the story. Tsukino home. The doorbell rang and Naruto yelled, "Got it!" Walking quickly to the front door, he opened it and blinked in surprise as he said, "Hey Ami, what are you doing here? I thought all you girls were out shopping?" Ami smiled as she bent her knees to be closer to his level and said, "We were, but I apologized after the first hour. I'm afraid I'm not a big spender. Anyway, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind having a discussion with me." Her face turned serious and she said in a much calmer tone, "It's about our friend Leon." Naruto blinked in confusion, wondering what the Mercury Sailor Explorer wanted with the artificial lunar construct before shrugging and saying, "Sure, let's go up to the attic and talk there." The couple entered the house, Ami giving a quick nod to the Tsukinos as they passed them in the family room. Once they were in the attic, Naruto climbed onto Chibiusa's bed, sitting Indian style next to the pillow, while Amid sat on the other end with her legs folded and soles touching, after taking off her shoes first, of course. "So what did you want to talk about, Leon?" Naruto asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Well, do you know how the invaders attacked my packed school yesterday?" Ami asked. "Yeah, that was the point of the shopping trip, wasn't it? To help you relax after that droid mistrust used her voodoo on all your classmates to turn on you," Naruto said with his arms crossed. He hadn't been part of that fight, or the previous one where the Dark Moon clan had taken over an animal park. He and Chad had been engaging Old Man Hino in another sparring match during the animal park fight, and the second they had given their regularly scheduled report to Minato. He was a little sour that the scouts hadn't thought to contact him for any of the fights, though at least no one had gotten hurt during them. Ami looked a little embarrassed, rubbing the back of her neck and smiling shyly as she said, "Well, yeah, but honestly I would have been fine just going to the library and enjoying a good book. I guess I'm just not cut out for shopping like the others, and now you're here talking to me?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Ami brought her hand to her mouth as she rubbed her neck like a fist and coughed once as she said, "Well, yeah? You see, I had a thought. If the Lunarians built an artificial intelligence in their lunar escape, isn't it? Is it possible the other planetary realms have done the same, and you think Leon might have an answer for you?" Naruto said. "It's worth a try, right?" Ami asked with a hopeful smile. Naruto hummed his agreement and extended his hand. Ami tilted her head, but easily reached out to accept it. Naruto's moon mark appeared and glowed white. When Ami's eyes cleared, she gasped at the scenery around her and said, "This is amazing!" Looking at Naruto, she said, "I had no idea you could bring non-lunars to this place." She then blinked in surprise at seeing Naruto in his true form. Naruto looked up with a smile and said, "It's actually pretty easy, as long as the person I bring is physically close enough anyway." Nice dress, by the way. Naruto created a full-length mirror and Mercury let out a pleasantly surprised, "Oh my!" She enjoyed how she looked in her princess form for a moment or two before looking back at Naruto and smiling as she asked, "So we'll be seeing Leon now?" Naruto nodded and led her to the registry. As they entered the room, the hologram projector on the cell phone turned on and Leon appeared. Smiling at them, Leon said, "Prince Naruto, welcome back. I'm so glad to see you again. When Princess Serenity informed me of the dream invasion the Dark Moon clan named you and Princess Chibiusa, I was very worried." "Thanks, Leon, it's good to see you too," Naruto said with a smile. Leon then turned his attention to Ami and his smile widened a little more as he said, "And Princess Meridia, this is certainly a welcome surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure of your visit?" Ami blinked in confusion and asked, "Sorry, but what did you call me?" Leon tilted his head with a slight hum and asked, "You didn't know what you were called during the Silver Millennium? I'm aware that your memories were sealed by Queen Serenity to prevent undoing the mental strain on your childhood bodies after being reincarnated, but I would have thought they would have been unlocked by now since she retrieved Sailor Mercury's mantle. After all, Princess Serenity's memories have mostly been unlocked at this point." He then frowned slightly as he added, "Though it seems portions have been lost in the reincarnation process." Ami looked down with a nod and said, "I'm afraid none of us, aside from Sailor Moon and Tuxedo Mask, have unlocked our memories. I think I sometimes see memories in my dreams, but they're more like flashes of images and hard to recall when I wake up." "Well, that's a little worrying," Leon said with a frown. A moment later, he shook his head and adopted a more professional posture. "We can return to the memory situation another time. You two came here looking for information after all. Now, how can I help you?" "Well, Meridia here," Naruto began, clearly testing out the new name before continuing. "I was wondering if your people had done anything similar to the registry, or even the lunarscape in general." Yes, I can see why you would ask that, given your sealed memories," Leon said with a nod before continuing. "Unfortunately, due to the fact that I was created to help lunars find the right people to contact for information, I do not have any information related to the construction of a temporal mind bridge that any of the other realms may, or may not have done. However, since the realms have intermarried, I can direct you to someone of Mercurian heritage who can answer your questions. Would you like to see a list of available people, along with their occupations?" "Yes, thanks, Leon," Ami said with a nod, and Leon stepped aside as a list of around 100 people appeared, all of them with occupations listed with fancy words that basically said they were either scientists who worked in the mind or time departments, or really good engineers. Ami frowned a little with a slight hum and asked, "Can you narrow it down to those who worked as heads of their departments?" "Of course, Princess," Leon said, and the list narrowed down to just 5 people. As it did, Leon said, "Would you like to talk to these people as a group, or would you rather narrow down the selection even further, Princess?" Ami's eyes narrowed slightly as she thought for a brief moment before saying, "I think this is a small enough group, Leon." "Very well, I will activate the conference protocol. Prince Naruto, please take Princess Meridia to Conference Room 1, Leon said, a map of the lunarscape appearing and a line leading from the registry to the named conference room. Naruto nodded and quickly memorized the short route before grabbing Ami's hand and pulling her out of the registry. Arriving at the conference room a few minutes later, Naruto opened the door and the pair entered the sight of 3 women and 2 men, all wearing lab coats and all with the color blue mixed into their hair. One of the women had almost completely blue hair, only 2 bracketed yellow stripes showing her mixed heritage, and even then Naruto wasn't sure she wasn't looking at the dye she was looking at. The group of scientists looked up from the group they had been in, and the oldest of them pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose as he said, I suppose this is why we were all called here. But we can get to that reason in a moment. Introductions first. I'm Dr. Miram, temporary engineer. Dr. Marina, mental health. I specialize in dreams and how they affect the body. The woman with the 2 blonde locks said with a small nod. Dr. Murdoch, architectural engineer. The second man said with a slight movement of one hand while the other absent-mindedly played with the small ponytail he wore his hair in. Dr. Mercaniel, astrophysicist specializing in temporal theory. One of the other women introduced herself, this one with the faintest tinge of green mixed with yellow and blue, showing she had something of a distant Plutonian streak along with lunar and Mercurian roots. And I'm Dr. Merdina. I have about 10 different degrees, so I won't bore you with a list. Just consider me a jack of all trades, said the last woman, the only one besides Dr. Miriam who had a hint of gray in her hair, though she really had to squint to see it. I'm sensing a theme here, Naruto said deadpan. All the scientists laughed, and Dr. Miriam said, yes, well, parents naming their children with mare in the front was a pretty strong tradition on our planet. Sure, there were others named differently, but the general statistics are that only about 15% of people were named without those 3 letters in front of the rest of their name. Naruto said before looking at Ami and saying, don't take this the wrong way, Meridia, but your people were strange. He put a little stress on the name before shaking his head and saying, you know what, it's just weird to suddenly call you that. After how long I've known you, I think I'll just stick with Ami from now on. Ami laughed a little and said, it's okay, Naruto. I'll admit I find him a little unusual, too. Dr. Marina chuckled and said, isn't that a little hypocritical coming from the guy named after a ramen filling fish cake? As some of the scientists and Ami laughed, Naruto gave her a flat look and said, it's Maelstrom, if you say so. Dr. Marina said with a cheeky smile, children, if we could return to the reason we've gathered here? Dr. Miriam suggested, and everyone became serious as he turned to Ami and asked, so, Princess Meridia, what information are you seeking? Ami straightened slightly under the scientist's now inquisitive gaze and said, I was wondering if the Mercurians created something similar to the moonscape to facilitate the exchange of information between time periods. You see, Queen Serenity of the Lunar Kingdom sent my generation of sailor scouts into the future through reincarnation, but only her daughter and Prince Endymion have regained any appreciable amount of their memories from their past lives, and I was hoping to try and find a way to open my own memories or at least speak to someone who could help me further increase my repertoire of skills. Oh, I think we can help you with that, Dr. Merdina said with a smile. Indeed, but it might be better to show rather than tell, Dr. Murdoch said with an eager smile. He then proceeded to lift the sleeve of his lab coat, revealing what looked like an Apple Watch. Pressing a button, a holographic interface appeared, and he quickly typed it in. A moment later, the conference room faded into complete whiteness. The light blue bled into the monochrome surroundings before the world suddenly seemed to shatter, and they appeared on the balcony of a very futuristic-looking castle floating above Mercury, the planet rotating at what seemed to them to be a serene pace, belying just how fast the satellite's orbital speed actually was. Welcome to Castle Mariner, Dr. Murdoch said with a shockwave. Whoa, Naruto said looking around. This is indeed very impressive, Ami said with the smile of an intern allowed into the core labs of her dream job. I'm glad you like it, Princess Meridia, but if you think this is impressive, wait until you see the archive, Dr. Murdoch said, leading her from the balcony toward the castle. As the pair left, Dr. Merdina knelt down to Naruto's eye level and said, Thank you for making it possible for us to come to this place, young prince. We'll take it from here. Naruto nodded and said, You're welcome. I think I'll head back to the lunar scape and see if any of the other kingdoms did anything similar. I'm sure the other sailor scouts will want to know when they find out about this. The old man nodded and said, That is a logical conclusion we must come to. Goodbye. Goodbye, Naruto said, closing his eyes for a moment before disappearing in a small pulse of silver light. Scene change. Tsukino residence. Hours spent in the lunar scape, but only moments in the real world. Later, Naruto's eyes opened and he rolled his neck slightly. Across from him, Ami opened her own eyes only to immediately place a hand on her forehead and say, My goodness, reconnecting with your physical body is quite disconcerting. You'll get used to it with practice. So, was your trip successful? Naruto asked. Ami smiled and said, Yes, indeed it was. All the memories of the techniques I knew in my previous life have not been sealed. I may not be able to use them all right now due to power limitations, but my repertoire is still larger than before. That's good to hear. And I was able to confirm that the other kingdoms made similar mind bridge constructions. I'm sure the rest of the girls might also be interested in learning some of the more advanced techniques," Naruto said. Ami nodded at that before tilting her head and saying, "I'm not sure we can get them to cut their shopping spree short, even for something like this. Perhaps we should wait until tomorrow to inform them of it." Naruto rolled his eyes and said, "Ugh, teenage girls and their shopping trips. I'm glad I'm not older so they can't convince me to be their pack mule." "No offense, of course." Ami brought a hand to her mouth and giggled as she said, "None taken, I assure you." Seriously, Ami got out of bed and said, "Thanks for all your help, Naruto. I know it's not really a thank you, but would you like to go get some ice cream?" "My treat." Naruto smiled and jumped out of bed as he said, "I'll never say no to free ice cream, let's go." The blonde boy running down the stairs made Ami laugh again even as she followed. It was nice to see Naruto act his age once in a while.
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.